Uh, Welcome, everybody. It is with immense honor and delight that we at the Maritime Research Center are hosting all of you today on a very important webinar, which is on the topic Indian Ocean Security Framework. Today's webinar will focus on Underwater Domain Awareness Framework for effective security in the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean region. As we all know that Indo-Pacific becomes a crucial arena for global power dynamic, the Indian Ocean's strategic significance has grown due to its political sensitivity and economic potential. We are thrilled to have partnered with the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies for this webinar. Through this webinar, we aim to explore challenges and opportunities within the IOR. The UDA framework, which has been crafted and developed by the Maritime Research Center, integrates policy and technology interventions with capacity and capability building to address pressing issues like submarine proliferations and capabilities of the non-state actors. We have an esteemed lineup of speakers from strategic security backgrounds who will share their valuable insights on today's topic. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and I hope this webinar proves to be an exciting and insightful one for all of us. Before we officially commence, here are a couple of announcements that I'd like to make. First is to the audience that please keep your microphones muted to minimize the background noise. Feel free to ask questions and share your comments in the chat, but keep the discussion relevant to the topic, please. And my announcement for the speakers is that please switch on your microphones and begin your address when your name is called upon. Apart from that, for the speakers, if you'd like to share your presentations with us, in case you want a backup, like if you face any glitch while making the presentation, if you want our team to make that presentation, you can just share your presentation with me on the same email thread, which is there, wherein I shared all the details about today's webinar. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Jeffrey Pine, who's Assistant Professor Maritime at NESA, USA, to share his opening remarks on the geopolitical realities in the Indian Ocean region. Before I invite him, I'd like to speak a little bit about him. He leads the NESA's engagements related to maritime and coastal information sharing data analysis. He hails from the landlocked US state, potentially explaining his fascination with the sea. Before joining NESA Center, Professor Pine served as a professor at Butler University and consulted for the World Bank. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Nishta. I will give you much more praise at the end of our sessions here, but none of this would be possible without your organization as well as that from the MRC. And obviously, Dr. Das, we owe all of you an immense debt. But good morning from a very unfall-like Washington, D.C. We've, I guess, the tensions of the election have actually bled into the climate. It's unusually warm for this time of year. Obviously, Washington is obsessive compulsive right now with the forthcoming 2024 election. India went through this process earlier this year, so we all know what happens in large democracies when the election season is upon us. There's a lot of silliness that goes on. But we're here to actually talk about something that is decidedly not related to an election, decidedly not related to something that is related to a political communication aspect, something that is really core not only to traditional security considerations, but also a long-term stability of our ecosystems, of global trade, essentially contemporary civilization to a large extent, and that is the health of the global commons, the health of the maritime spaces, and how the underwater aspect of that domain is disproportionately kind of a new frontier. It offers substantial potential wealth for countries to exploit, to protect. It represents a new space due to technology of greater considerations on a whole host of traditional and non-traditional security threats. And it also deals with essentially a lot of the ways in which we communicate contemporarily, given the presence of undersea cables and the connectivity of our globe. But my many thanks to all of you, wherever you're joining from, whether it be here in the morning in Washington, or in the evening in India, or anywhere else around the globe. The NESA Center, just for sake of background, we are technically called the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies. We are one of 6 United States Department of Defense regional centers. The 2 largest of our sister centers are the Marshall Center, which is located in Garmisch, Germany, and the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, which is based in Honolulu, Hawaii. NESA is one of 3 that are located on the campus of the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. And we cover what you could broadly call, or what I would call, I think Chuck, my colleague from NESA, would also agree with this, the Indian Ocean Rim. A lot of my colleagues say that we cover Central South Asia and the Middle East. But for Chuck and myself, who think from a water mindset, we cover the Indian Ocean Rim. We don't use the entire title because we are Americans. We don't want to use 4 words when we can just use 1. So therefore, we always just make it called NESA. It's far easier for us to get through that. But from our kind of mission statement, what we do, if any of you are not familiar, is NESA is charged by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, as well as other components of the United States Department of Defense, to run engagements with key partners and allies throughout our area of responsibility on traditional and non-traditional security issues. In essence, what we do is have sessions like this, bringing together scholars to do 3 primary things. One is to learn. To get smarter. So I can tell you from the jump, the conversation today, I'm most interested in learning from all of you, either through questions and comments, through the speakers themselves and their expertise, and also modeling out potential future engagements. That's number 1, always on our list. Number 2 is ways that we can help inform our stakeholders inside the U.S. government on how to enhance U.S. policy. How to get better, how to be more responsive to partners, how to redirect current focuses on particular issues. And third is to do a horizon scan, to essentially look forward down the kind of the pathway, so to speak. Given that all of us who are in this room who have been in government service or have worked at the kind of cutting edge of technology or business know that people who are in the trenches, so to speak, do not have time. They respond to crises continuously. They bounce from one problem set to the next. Those of us in this room currently, we often have the luxury of a little bit more time. And so we can think through things a little bit longer and help those that are in the trenches pop their head up occasionally and get a sense of what's north, south, east, and west. But that's a quick background on NESA, and we're happy to be partnered with the MRC for this inaugural event between our 2 centers, and hopefully the cooperation will continue going forward. As for my remarks, I will not try to belabor it because I know that honestly, Dr. Das can give far more comprehensive introduction than I ever could. But the kind of inspiration, at least from NESA's mindset for this cooperative event and for the conversation we're about to have, is premised initially on from the US mindset, the Indo-Pacific concept. It has become the epicenter of global geoeconomics, of geopolitics, of geostrategic concerns. Obviously, we all know that the specter of US-China competition, as well as China-India competition, lingers over the Indo-Pacific. In some ways, that competitive relationship can be a positive. It has spurred technological innovation. It has spurred kind of diversification of aspects of the global supply chain. But it also brings with it tensions and concerns, especially by smaller regional states that are worried about flashpoints, who are worried about competition becoming conflict. The US is intent on making sure that that does not happen. And we do so through our kind of traditional methodology of relying on partners and allies. And obviously the US-India bilateral relationship has kind of gone into warp drive over the last few decades, given what it was, say, in the late 90s to what it is today, has been immense, and still to this day in Washington, it's a sign of great pride for the amount of people on both sides of that relationship and how much investment has been levied. Returning to the Indo-Pacific, from the US mindset, the Indo-Pacific is largely a region defined by its waters. And as a result, the challenges of those waters is a way a lot of the tensions play out. We have the issues of protection or protecting ecosystems, which cover everything from illegal fishing to illegal dumping to biomass degradation to coastal erosion, a whole host of complex problem sets. But then you have things that are more advanced and more traditional in their nature, essentially expansive sovereignty claims, specifically in the South China Sea, increasing tensions, aggressive actions between different countries in the waters of the East China Sea, near the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. In the midst of it, the United States and other like-minded actors, including India, are doing what they can to protect the freedom of navigation so that these waters are not defined by their conflict, but remain conduits of trade and exchange, but also standing firm for the established rules and norms of the international system, just like India does, often more routinely in the Indian Ocean than the Pacific, but those connective waters, the challenge sets are spreaded quickly, and we all know that. So for NESA specifically, what we have fixated on is a lot of the issues when it comes to the maritime domain and the waters of the Indo-Pacific is related to a lack of awareness. And I don't mean awareness in the sense of a military mindset, awareness in terms of a lot of policymakers, a lot of civilian leaders, a lot of people who are leaders in the private sector don't know the extent in which minor changes of the way things work at sea has tremendous catastrophic domino effect. I mean, we've seen it in certain points where the entire world realized this, the blockage of the Suez, for instance, the Ukraine Russia war and how that has disrupted trade into the Baltic as well as the Black Sea, tensions in the South China Sea and how they have increased cost. And then most recently, the attacks in the Red Sea by the Houthi and how that has disrupted global trade, massively increased the cost of shipping commodities globally, changed kind of new tensions that exist on our kind of global supply chain, and inspired an increase in armed robbery at sea and even acts of piracy as a result of these disruptions. So awareness is one thing that the NESA Center really fixates on, and what we could call maritime domain awareness, which started as a disproportionately state conceived idea, and very much tied to security forces of those states, so coast guards, navies, other constabularies. But increasingly, the concept of maritime domain awareness has become more expansive because there are more stakeholders involved. You have non-governmental organizations that are involved in domain awareness. You have international organizations like the UN or the International Seabed Authority or IORA or ASEAN and others that are helping seek to define kind of awareness, but also the tools in which we use to spread awareness are immensely changing. It is no longer a world in which if you are a captain of a vessel or you are a fisherman setting out to sea for the morning's catch, where you're just relying on your immediate information that you can see and what you can detect by your own vessel's equipment. We are no longer in a drought of data. We're exact opposite. We have a flood of data. We have a deluge of data. where everything from satellite imagery to sensor buoys to different forms of artificial intelligence or machine learning tools that can fuse various data streams together, to predictive modeling that can even project potential future hotspots based on historical trends and their accumulation. All of these things have kind of exploded onto the scene. They're not really necessarily wrapped up into a singular form yet. Obviously, in India, you have the Indian Ocean Region Information Fusion Center, based just outside of Delhi. You have obviously the Information Fusion Center in Singapore that have been models on state-facilitated conversations, but there's a whole host of non-governmental actors that are using free-to-use data, using information from the European Space Agency, from NASA, from NOAA here in the United States, that are really shaping how we conceive of the seas, both the air above the seas and the surface of our seas. But this gets us to today's conversation, which is the underwater domain. That same kind of technological and technical innovation is happening when it comes to the underwater domain. It is far more delayed than what we saw over the last several decades when it came to the surface. There is, for lack of using a pun, the dark waters beneath the surface remain very dark to a whole host of people, both policymakers and governments, but also people who, in either a direct or indirect way, have to explore or understand that area for their own economic or political or social purpose. We still, to this day, it's the kind of undiscovered and unknown domain. And so how do we do that? How do we set up standards to protect the underwater space? How do we provide clarity, share information on it? What is a no-go? What is where we should put our emphasis? All of these things are being mapped out now in conversations such as this. So we do know that the underwater domain has a whole host of geopolitical concerns attached to it. So even those who approach it from merely a scientific or an exploratory mechanism are also getting tied into political conversations. These things are very, very complicated, also very, very interesting. And the rules are being written and kind of agreed upon as we go. It's exciting, but it also comes with a lot of risk. So just to return to kind of my initial opening statement is we're just very thankful to be partnered in this effort. And more importantly, we're really looking forward to learning from everyone here gathered, their mindsets, their perspectives, their inputs. So with that, my thanks to you. I will jump back on to moderate the first session, but I think I turn it over to Dr. Das. But good morning once again here in Washington.
Insightful remarks and for explaining to all of us more about what NESA does and the partnership between India and the USA and what can be done. With that, I'd like to move to the next speaker, who will discuss about the UDA framework, which has been spearheaded by the Maritime Research Center. I'd like to call upon Dr. Commander Arnab Das, who is the director and founder of the Maritime Research Center. He is an ex-naval officer with 2 decades of active service and a PhD holder from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. He has a specialization in underwater acoustics. Dr. Das has worked on several projects and has many publications to his credit. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Nishta. Thank you, Jeff, firstly for partnering us. And we really value this partnership, and our couple of interactions in the past definitely encourages me and my team. So to just, before I start, to give you a sense of what Maritime Research Center is all about. We are a private organization. Obviously, we are trying to punch far above our weight category. But our focus has been on the underwater domain awareness. I mean, maritime domain awareness is still a much bigger domain, but we would like to focus on the underwater domain awareness. And of course, try and do everything that is required to be done to generate underwater domain awareness and also bring actionable inputs for all the stakeholders. MRC is partnered by Neerdhwani Technologies in the Indian literature. Neer is water and Dhwani is sound. So these two organizations have the capability of turnkey projects implemented right at the waterfront. So with that intention, we want to cover the entire spectrum of policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity and capability building. So with that, I mean, we have a young team of people, but our focus has been on building the body of work. As Jeff said, that there is a lot of information that requires to be put out in the open domain. And I somehow feel that the underwater domain has not got the attention it deserves. And a lot of information is not available in the public domain. So our thought process is that we need to generate a significant amount of body of work. And we have been focusing on that. And now lately we have started on the front end or the outreach initiative, and we are looking out for partnering organizations who would like to support us in this. And we really thank Jeff and the entire panel of speakers, experts who are joining us from the US. And of course, our own very senior people who are joining us from India, people from the diplomacy, people from the bureaucracy, from the industry, and from the armed forces. So very senior people with a couple of decades of experience. So thank you all for joining us, and I will jump into my presentation to give you a sense of what is the underwater domain awareness framework that we are talking about. So if you can see my screen, I have titled my presentation on underwater domain awareness framework for safe, secure, sustainable growth. I mean, safe is safety from any natural disasters. Secure is, of course, we talk about security, both internal and external security. I mean, you know, this part of the world is extremely politically volatile. So non-state actors are very, very active, and more often than not, working very closely with the states. So, and sustainability, of course, is but we are looking at it in a much, much more broader sense, not limited to the ecological aspect only. And of course, economic growth. So I want to highlight that our work specifically addresses the uniqueness of the tropical waters. So with that, I mean, you know, today the Indo-Pacific has become very, very important strategically, and all great powers are trying to deploy the strategic assets in the tropical waters. So what is this tropical water we are talking about is something we need to, because a lot of discussion that I've seen, I mean, I have been fortunate that back in the Navy as well as later, I have been associated with the underwater domain. I mean, probably the last 3 decades. So what my understanding is, people ignore this unique tropical characteristics. So that has become our focus. So now, even if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategic space, by definition, it is the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So the tropical waters cannot be ignored. And when we talk about the tropical waters, apart from the warm versus cold water, I mean, as you know, the underwater technology development happened during the Cold War era, and a lot of uncertainties of the underwater space got taken care. And the technology development was absolutely fantastic, but it was for the requirement of the temperate and the polar region. I mean, the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. So that, when we look at it from in the tropical waters, the same, I mean, talk about a particular sonar, a sonar performance degrades by almost 60% when it is deployed in the tropical waters. And sonar would, I mean, or acoustic survey would remain the key aspect for any underwater domain awareness. And the other aspect, very important, which Jeff also mentioned, is just the military focus will not take us very far. So the economical aspect also needs to be brought to the forefront. So even for economic exploitation of the underwater domain, the sonar requirement cannot be ignored. So unless, I mean, we know the tropical waters have very rich biodiversity. There is a massive amount of resources that are available for us to exploit, and how to exploit it sustainably will become a huge challenge going forward. So underwater domain awareness will become very important. But what we are seeing in this part of the world is that we have become more of victims of the oceans rather than being able to harness the ocean to our benefit. So a lot of domain awareness will be extremely important. Now, for any strategic perspective, I mean, people, economy, nature would remain the three pillars, I mean, as we may call it. So people, I mean, the coastal and riverine communities, I mean, the underwater domain awareness that we are talking about addresses both the marine and the freshwater systems. And this is 75% of the earth. So how all the coastal communities and at multiple levels, I mean, it has to be an inclusive approach. Livelihood losses have become a very significant challenge, and that's what is giving rise to the political volatility. And of course, we are not able to harness the economic advantage that we have. So there's a lot of focus that is required and a lot of technology that needs to be brought in so that, you know, we can take it forward. I mean, we have been importing a lot of technology from the West, but in the absence of customization to the local conditions, we are not able to get the best performance of these technologies and the know-how that we are getting. So definitely a lot of indigenous effort is required. And I think a huge collaborative approach will be extremely critical. I mean, if we want to ensure a better world. I mean, in the last, the Tokyo summit of the Quad, the power talked about greater public good. I mean, how do we define greater public good is a question which all of us need to ask and try and answer. And of course, nature will be very important. Sustainability, there's a lot of talk, but on the ground, I mean, there is still a green versus blue debate that's going on. So we need to focus on the underwater space to ensure, I mean, we'll dwell on this a little more. So in India also, the government has been gearing up, and there is a significant maritime shift from the earlier continental mindset that was there. But I think a lot of distance needs to be covered. There has been a lot of announcements, but I think capacity building is something we all need to work together on. And I see that as a big opportunity for us to contribute and also seek partnerships with people who are, of course, far ahead in this domain. So this is the framework. I would like to explain what is this UDA framework that we are talking about. What we are seeing is massive fragmentation among the stakeholders. I mean, the four stakeholders, whether it is strategic security, blue economy, sustainability and climate change, and also science and technology. I mean, the digital transformation will require massive amount of, science and technology to be deployed. I mean, the horizontal construct that you see, all the four may have their specific requirement, but the core requirement will be the acoustic capacity and capability building. I mean, if the acoustic survey suffers 60% degradation, it is not helping anybody. But if all of them come together, the pooling of resources and synergizing of effort will really do a lot of good, and particularly the global south that we talk about. And if you look at the vertical construct, I mean, we hardly have any information about what is happening below the surface of the water. So a lot of sensing, application-specific interpretation or analysis, and then the regulation or the policy aspect. And also what we are seeing is, there is a lot of ad hocism. I mean, allow me to use that word, because there are a lot of areas in the maritime domain which are over-regulated and a lot which are completely ignored. So this brings that structure to it where, we can kind of earmark what is being done and how the policy can prioritize certain things and, take it in a very, very structured manner. And this is the structure. I mean, I call it a comprehensive, structured, and inclusive. I will explain what are these three aspects. So, and also when you look at this part of the world, the demography is a very, very important aspect we need to keep in touch. I mean, keep in mind, the young aspirational population that we have they're all looking for meaningful career opportunities. So how do we deploy them meaningfully and channelize their energy is something we need to look at. So the smaller cubes in this could be those aspects where these young people can find employability and find connection and how they can contribute. I mean, I can go on and on, but I think I will stop here because this gives that structure that is required to kind of drive this forward. Like just to elaborate this on one specific issue, like underwater radiated noise is something which is becoming more and more important. I mean, for the navies or the military, acoustic stealth has always been very important, and definitely a lot of work has been done, particularly by the developed countries. But it has not percolated to the rest of the non-military applications. But that is also very important because today we are seeing a massive amount of big whale strandings, which is a result of high underwater radiated noise because of the merchant shipping. So how do we, and now International Maritime Organization has also now become conscious, and they have started talking, and they are now in the stage of implementing certain regulatory procedures. So again, the same capability, what I'm trying to bring out is the acoustic capacity and capability building that we do can be utilized by multiple stakeholders, and they all can contribute in terms of resources and whatever they can contribute in terms of even technology. The second aspect is sediment management. The tropical waters have a very unique sediment transport pattern. Whether it is navigability, water resource management, there's a massive amount of silting in our water bodies, and it is causing massive amount of issues, whether for flood management or drought. It's a very big challenge. So how do we kind of bring people together and, they all contribute and build this up? I mean, so again, pooling of resources and synergizing of effect becomes a very important aspect. I mean, the user academia industry partnership, I mean, there are already a lot of models. This doesn't require any new initiative, but the existing things has to be just aligned to the underwater domain and how we can achieve policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity and capability building. This is, I mean, of course, digital transformation will become the key. I mean, even for the global south, if they have to jump into this, but how will the global south get into this? So this is marine spatial planning that we have built for underwater noise using the automated identification system data. So the entire data has been picked up online, and my team has really come out with this, and we won some innovation challenge also, and this has been also projected by the government of India to the IMO. So, but this can be used even for submarine deployment. So, I mean, you can see the same thing. One is for ecological. I mean, you can see on the west coast of India, a lot of strandings are happening because of the high noise levels. So this is just one aspect. We are trying to work on multiple aspects, even finding concentration of different species of fishes, aquaculture, seaweed cultivation. So we have translated this whole digital transformation into multiple domains, and this becomes the inclusive aspect that we are talking about. Even the coastal communities will benefit out of this, and how the policy intervention can be brought in, and how technology intervention for operational management of aquaculture and fisheries can be a very important aspect. So I think I've spoken about this. A lot of AI and data analytics goes behind this. Now, if you look at it, to implement the acoustic capacity and capability building, we talk about to see, to understand, and to share. When we say to see, we are talking about the sensors and the platform, whether it is an AUV or anything else, how that can collect data. So the appropriate, and there's a huge opportunity for collaboration here, and little specificity in terms of the local conditions. But the second aspect, to understand, where once the data is collected, the data processing, here the important aspect is the mitigating the tropical conditions. The distortions that have been got added to the data has to be mitigated. So here it becomes very important that indigenous effort will be required. I mean, the developed world, led by the US, have been talking about shallow water acoustic measurement swarms exercises that they have been conducting. So a lot, but none of it has happened in the Indian Ocean region. So that is something, I mean, it has been done in South China Sea, East China Sea, but nothing has happened here. So I think Indian Ocean does deserve to be given more importance. But this aspect is something where the local, people have to get involved. I mean, even when you talk about collaboration, to see, definitely collaboration can be done, but to understand has to be done by the local people. Otherwise, there is always remain a trust deficit. But the third part is equally important. When once we have the actionable input, how do we share it with the user? Every user, whether it is a fisherman to a top policymaker, they will have their specific requirement. Even the platform, a fisherman would require a mobile app. So how do we make them very customized and specific is something we need to look at. Then only it makes sense. Otherwise, it will not make sense to the user. And the second aspect is the different category of human resource that will be required. The high-end data analytics is something very important. But once that data is captured, the interpretation will require a lot of domain knowledge. I mean, typically when we talk about AI and ML, the domain knowledge becomes a big challenge, and we are not able to achieve what we want to achieve. So domain specialization is very important, and we need domain specialists who will kind of contribute. But the third part is far more interesting for me, because the field deployment, typically we should be able to skill the coastal community and the riverine communities who are already very comfortable with the waterfront. And they will become part of the development process, and they will get integrated. I mean, that's where the inclusivity also becomes very, very important. And as I mentioned, modeling and simulation. I mean, if you just look at the Indian EZ, it is 3.7 million square kilometers. How many sensors can we put? So we have to rely on modeling and simulation. This is not being done in this part of the world. So this is something we need to work together on. We have definitely worked a lot on the modeling and simulation of the tropical waters. And I feel that if the Global South has to be part of this initiative, modeling and simulation can only be the viable way forward. These are some of the examples how the underwater domain awareness has been taken forward by the developed world. I mean, right from the Sochus to the Point Sur Lighthouse, and then Asia X, which was conducted in the beginning of this century in the South China Sea. And then based on that, China went on to do the Great Wall, underwater Great Wall project. So one has to learn from that, but no such big initiative has happened in the Indian Ocean. So I think there's a very fit case where we need to work together for that aspect. And that's where the collaborations will become very, very meaningful. And the site-specific aspects will get highlighted. And as I mentioned about the greater public good, we have not been able to really define the greater public good. And when we are talking about multilateral partnerships or bilateral partnerships, unless it cannot remain. UDA cannot remain a security-driven formulation. I mean, Jeff has already talked about it, so I don't want to repeat it again. So I would suggest for any collaboration or any initiative to take it forward, outreach, engage, sustain is the best way forward. Outreach is such sensitization events, and in a more serious manner, we can make it more specific: webinars, seminars, workshops. But then engage is how do we initiate internships and fellowships at the young people level, young professional and the student level, and then engaging with the stakeholders and in the industry and the policy makers. And then at the sustained level, we start initiating projects, 3 years, 5 years projects, so that we can implement and undertake pilot projects. And then, of course, a center of excellence. All these 5 pillars are very important: research, innovation, skilling, knowledge, and policies. All of them have to work together, and this will bring the multidisciplinary aspect. So I think to my last one slide is MSP has to be at a global level, and there the uniqueness of the tropical waters will have to be kept in mind. A lot of skill is required. Unless we involve the local people, we'll not get the acceptability that is required. A lot of innovation for the Indo-Pacific is important. Tropical challenges, of course, has to be the focus, and community engagement. So we have come up with these initiatives called the 100 Coastal Warriors, 100 River Warriors. This is going to be a pilot project where we will deploy 100 people from the coastal region to kind of take care of the local coastal issues in a comprehensive manner. It will take care of policy, it will take care of technology, and of course, the deployment in the field. And so even the river systems are very different. I mean, when we talk about the Brahmaputra River, it's a transboundary river, but it's a very, very unique river. So we need to keep that in mind. And a UDA-driven digital transformation and a comprehensive MSP. I mean, it has to be multi-sectoral kind of an initiative. Otherwise, it will be very difficult or it will be unviable to drive such a thing. So inclusiveness will be very, very important. So thank you for your patient hearing. Back to you, Nishtha.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for your insightful presentation. Now, I think we'll move on to the next segment. Let's get started with today's sessions. Now that the opening remark and the welcome remarks are done, I'd like to inform you that the program has now, from now onwards, it's going to be divided into two parts, session 1 and session 2. Session 1, as I told at the beginning of the webinar, that it's going to be moderated by Mr. Jeffrey Pine. And the central theme of this session is challenges and opportunities in the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean region. We are fortunate that we have an esteemed lineup of speakers who are going to share their views. So we have Dr. Thomas F. Lynch. We also have Vice Admiral A.R. Karve. We have Dr. Nilanthi as well. Apart from that, Dr. Ajay Kumar's recording is the keynote address is going to be played subsequently. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Pine to moderate the session. Thank you.
Okay, good morning again. Dr. Das, thank you for your remarks. It serves as kind of the aspiration on the horizon that a lot of people are aiming for. Our first session dives into what are the challenge sets and what are the opportunities that currently exist in the IOR that feed into the importance of both maritime domain awareness generally, but specifically underwater domain awareness. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of variables going on. But before we launch into the introductions, something I forgot in my opening remarks, and I'm doing this for the coverage not only of myself, but for all of my American colleagues. For everyone in the audience and who watches it in other formats, do know that you are hearing just our individual analysis, in no way, shape, or form, or any of us speaking for any larger institution or any larger aim. This is based upon our own mind. So any great ideas, the individuals get credit. Any bad ideas, blame Jeff Payne. So that'll be the way it works. But we are joined, like Nishtha said, by 3 great speakers here live, and then one that will join us during a break. We have Dr. Thomas Lynch, who is a good friend of NESA. He is a distinguished research fellow at the Center for Strategic Research at the Institute of National Security Studies at the National Defense University, which we all turn that into acronyms as well, because Thomas is incredibly well known throughout Washington, throughout South Asia. He is a renowned expert, researcher, speaker, leader when it comes to security issues pertaining to everything from great power politics, India's strategic rise, the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, and then wider South Asia, as well as wider Indian Ocean regional issues. He's relied upon heavily by various aspects of the U.S. government for his expertise. It's always good to rely on him. So Thomas, great to see you. Thank you so much. Also, we are joined by Ms. Nilanthi Samanarayaka, who is a security analyst. She's an author. She's currently working on a book that is long overdue for what she can fill into the kind of literature. She is currently associated with the United States Institute of Peace. She's also an adjunct fellow at the East-West Center. She was formerly of the Center for Naval Analyses. She's an expert on Indian Ocean regional dynamics, politics, maritime security. Honestly, I usually defer to Nilanthi on a lot of issues pertaining to the waters of the Indian Ocean if I can ever help it. So just speaking from the American mindset, we have 2 stellar speakers to kick us off. And then also joining us from our Indian side is Vice Admiral A.R. Karve, retired Indian Naval Vice Admiral. He last served as the 27th Flag Officer, Commanding in Chief of the Southern Naval Command. He has been involved in the underwater space for decades, including anti-submarine specialization. And he's also an alumnus of the NESA Center, as well as other professional military education and professional military exchanges. The Vice Admiral, I know, will have, he's probably forgotten more than I could ever learn about the maritime space. So we look forward to hearing his remarks soon. But we're going to go by the calendar. You can put your comments, questions in the chat or raise your hand. I will do my best to rally all of those. But Dr. Lynch, we'll turn first to you because you're the first on the speaker list. 15 minutes for you each. Oh, you're muted. Okay. Bottom. Oh, the slides. Okay. No, we don't. Let's see. He is muted. Let me see if I can unmute him. Do you have your?
Hello.
There we go. There we go.
How do you hear me, Jeff?
Perfect. You're all set.
Hey, fantastic. Yeah, I think I've learned here that this software requires you guys to release our voices into the echo chamber. So thank you for doing that. And let me add Jeff's greetings from here in Washington this bright sunny morning, and wish you all the best wherever you are in the region and the theater. I am delighted to join today in this project for a few minutes here on this first panel. And so I want to do a couple things initially. First, Jeff's already mentioned this, but even though I come to you from National Defense University, part of the Department of Defense, everything you're going to hear from me today represents the fruits of my own research, analysis, and understandings, and does not necessarily represent the viewpoints of National Defense University, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Having said that, I am very appreciative of NESA Center's inviting me to join in this important project, and I'm delighted to make the acquaintance of the Maritime Research Center. Dr. Das, very nice to meet you, and with strong appreciation for the efforts and what you all are embarking on here in a very important area. Since I am joined by the esteemed colleagues that you've brought together here today, I am very appreciative of the expertise they will have in areas that I might not have so much of. So what I'd like to do in my brief period of time here is to really focus on three areas that bring to bear some of the research and the work I've done in concert with the U.S. Department of Defense. So with apologies to Dr. Das, I'm going to offer you here kind of three sets of commentary that really bridge from what I would call the maritime domain awareness paradigm short of armed conflict into thinking about and how I believe the U.S. government, and particularly the Defense Department, is thinking about the Indian Ocean region in times of crisis or conflict. And I hope I'll provide some of what I've seen in my research as potential synergies between those two areas in the categories that you all have been talking about. I'm also informed by the fact that I'm here with Nalanthe, whose writings on this topic are prolific and unfailingly profound. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Nalanthe just published something that you should be able to access, all of you, online last week out of the East-West Center, which touches on some very important points about U.S. strategy in the Indian Ocean region. And I would commend that to you, although I know, Nalanthe, you may discuss that a bit. So what I want to do here today in my remaining time is offer comments in three buckets or areas. First, I'll specify U.S. strategic interests in the IOR. Sorry, Nalanthe, some of what you've written and will probably say will be echoed here, but hopefully repetition will be useful for the audience. Second, I'll talk to you about what I see as U.S. activities or initiatives in the IOR that get us into the underwater domain and kind of how that's being thought about. First, in terms of risks or concerns, and second, in terms of opportunities to move forward in that area, particularly in this bridge from pre-conflict or confrontation into conflict and confrontation. And then I'll offer you kind of 3 points for summarization. So let me start then, for those in the audience unfamiliar with kind of what I would argue to you are kind of U.S. strategic interests in the Indian Ocean region at the big picture level, and then kind of some of the documentation that's out there about these, and then a bridge to why I would add some thoughts to what's in U.S. publications and articulated strategies to why underwater domain awareness matters in the context of where we are now. First, there are two operative documents that anyone in this seminar that wishes to look at how the U.S. is thinking about the Indian Ocean region, both in terms of, pre-conflict and then confrontation and crisis mode, should turn to. And neither one is is robust or wholly satisfactory on the Indian Ocean. But nonetheless, they are our two primary documents. First is the U.S. National Security Strategy of October 2022, which talks about the Indian Ocean region in the Indo-Pacific security construct. And then second, there is the U.S. Indo-Pacific Strategy, actually published in February of 2022, so prior to our national security strategy. And again, it situates the Indian Ocean region in the construct of the wider Indo-Pacific. Okay, I think, and here I'm echoing things that Nalanthi and I have talked about a lot and that she writes about and other scholars do here. I think there are really three key elements, and then a fourth that I would add in to what the U.S. overall strategy is for the Indian Ocean region before we get to how underwater domain awareness fits into that. First is to assure the free flow of commerce and ideas across the Indian Ocean region. And that is critical in times of no armed conflict, but even more importantly, in times of corollary armed conflict and confrontation. That freedom and that assurance, both a positive and a negative assurance of that freedom. Second, to assure that the U.S. has necessary military access to the region. Part of that has to do with actual venues and locations, but a lot of it these days in American strategy has to do with access to partners, partnerships, and integration. And third, I think our strategy acknowledges that the Indian Ocean region is what we of a military background would call a supporting theater, not a main effort theater. So what do I mean by that? What we mean by that is if the United States was to get into a significant conflagration with its main great power rival, China, that it would wish to see friends and partners provide maritime domain awareness, access control, positive flow of commerce, as well as negative or interdictive flow of commerce that would be going towards activities that would be inimical to America's allies or partners in the adjoining region, the Pacific. Okay, and so the corollary, the fourth item here that I think relates to the project we're involved with underwater domain awareness today, and that I've looked at extensively as some of the other scholars have in terms of maritime domain awareness, is how to establish reliable domain situational awareness that is contiguous, that means exists in times of peace as well as in times of conflagration, and that assures that there is access to friends and partners, and then there is an absence of disruption by rivals or others who would attempt to shut down the free flow of commerce, activities, and ideas. Now, clearly in that, the underwater domain is powerful and important, not just to understanding the framework of how commerce exists, but also because underwater activities, both pre-conflict and during conflict, are those that can have a very telling and dominant say in how disruptive conflict events are. And one has to start thinking about that arguably well prior to the establishment or the event of hostilities or frictions. All right. So to be fair, American strategy in the Indo-Pacific is pretty specific toward the Pacific, so it's Pacific centric, but the corollary here is, and you find this actually written in US documents, is that America's aims in the Indian Ocean region are to work with a, quote, leading India, to have a strong and resilient partnership with India that is interoperable and interactive both before and potentially during conflict, that bridges other American partners in the region, and that situates India as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, okay, above, both in sea and air, on the surface of the maritime domain, and then underwater in the maritime domain. So with that kind of as a thumbnail sketch for you of where I think, the United States strategy sees and situates the IOR, and then where underwater domain awareness kind of fits into that in this contiguous space from non-conflict to potential conflict, let's talk about what I think are some dominant, not all of them, but some dominant themes in terms of American activities and initiatives in the Indian Ocean region, and that relate to underwater domain awareness at this point. First, in terms of risks and concerns, I think the major risk and concern for the United States right now, and that's an evolved one for perhaps U.S. and New Delhi perspectives, but is not one in terms of long-standing American perspectives, is the concern of managing and monitoring underwater sea activities right now that are being pursued by China. And amongst those, I think we need to include in our minds things like underwater mapping, which the Chinese have become increasingly assertive, if not even aggressive in doing, particularly around places like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, the access points to the Malacca Straits and other parts of the region. Second, the security and viability of underwater sea cables, which is not independent from the previous point that I just made, because those two are heavily intertwined. The mapping and accessing and understanding of the region with designs to then simultaneously improve Chinese access to message conduits through underwater sea cables, and with the potential to tap into or disrupt normal modes of commerce in underwater sea cables. And then third, and again, this is not an exclusive listing, and I look forward to our conversation if we want to go into more detail, but third is the actual positive, continuous knowledge and tracking of where Chinese military submarines are and what they're doing. And there, I want to flag up that I think unclassified sources have detailed in the last 6 to 8 months a growing concern that we may not have the degree to which one would want to have positive, continuous, unbroken knowledge of where Chinese submarines are. And that is a concern. And that gets right to what are the array of, what's the interoperability of peacetime management, monitoring, and tracking, so that we don't get a surprise, we being partnerships amongst America, India, and other friends in the region. We don't get a surprise with Chinese military submarines appearing someplace engaged in mischief because we didn't track them and know what they were doing. All right. And that is a concern. And I'll put it in context, as the United States did its Cold War business with the Russians, where, yeah, we had a long-standing, peacetime conflict with admittedly nowhere near as much economic engagement, but we took as a point of pride always knowing where their submarines were. Always. Peacetime, confrontation, crisis, always. Never a doubt. And if there was a doubt, it was an emotional crisis for the United States Navy. All right? And I think that is something that I need to emphasize in terms of growing a partnership with the Indian Navy, looking at net security, looking at the wider array of things as India comes more out from a, brown water near a shore, thinking in those terms as kind of where, from a U.S. security strategy perspective, we're trying to turn this boat, to use that metaphor. Second, I think one of the risks here is on the U.S. side, still not a proper understanding of the Indian Ocean region as a contiguous whole. That means going from Australia to Africa. And part of this, my third point, is that we have U.S. combatant command splits right now in the middle of the Indian Ocean that are not helpful. Between our Indo-Pacific Command, which ostensibly is responsible for the entire Indian Ocean region, but that actually really only has a boundary that goes to the western side of the Seychelles, and then two other American combatant commands pick up there, U.S. CENTCOM and U.S. AFRICOM. Now, my work with our Defense Department shows that we are thinking more critically now in the last 24 to 36 months about how to do better in this holistic framework, but we're still not there. There's a long way to go, and there are some initiatives that we can talk about in question and answer that I hope are going forward. And then third, I think the risks and concerns are that right now there is a very limited amount of interoperability in particularly underwater domain awareness arenas. Sensors, items and things that can track everything from, black flag vessels that turn off their transponders to do nasty things in the fisheries or in mineral deposits, all the way to the security force operations, including the Chinese, and perhaps to a lesser extent, the Pakistanis, when they are problematic in that region. Okay, so I think those are kind of categories and buckets of things that from a security point of view are challenging. But what are the opportunities? Well, I think the opportunities really mirror the challenges in many ways. First, the United States, out of our Defense Department and State Department, but also in our Congress, are starting to try to focus our peacetime and our security establishment on thinking about the Indian Ocean as a more contiguous region. To put it in Dr. Das's terms, a more contiguous tropical water region, so that we actually are working with thinking about and engaging across the framework of the entire region, not just where our combatant commands break or things like that. Next, I think there's an encouragement in terms of moving towards interoperability, at least at the surface level, in that as of November 2023, India officially announced that it would take on full membership in the US-led cooperative maritime forces that largely work against piracy and drugs and narcotics, and then the safe shipping of vessels in and around disruptions from places like the Houthis and others. I think that is an enormous help towards this interoperability, but I'll acknowledge that's not right now in the space of undersea domain awareness, but you can't be successful on the surface if you're not successful under the surface in knowing what's going on there. And then I also think there's a growing awareness in peacetime of the need to provide focused priorities in terms of managing and monitoring things that will be interoperable, moving from a peacetime to a crisis or conflict time, particularly in the area of monitoring of rival military forces below the sea and on the sea, and then the tracking and management of sea cables and of underwater devices. And here, I just want to highlight the fact that a lot of what has to be established and where there's an enormous opportunity, and I was encouraged, Dr. Das, to see your presentation got into a lot of this, is establishing common norms, common standards, and common access to these elements and areas. And the trick here is to make these accessible to the people that need this to do legitimate commercial activities or law enforcement activities in peacetime, but also not make it so inclusive that it is a security risk during times of confrontation or crisis. And therein, there really is an opportunity and a need to do something that's specified in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, and that also one can find in the charter as it is of the Quad dialogue. And that's a threefold item: to participate in and to establish critical approaches, common approaches to standards for critical and emerging technology that allows for integration and inclusivity, but also allows for selective exclusion if and as people don't play by the rules, people meaning different governments don't play by the rules in those networks. Next, to secure an open internet framework, but again, one that is permeable to most, but not all. That is, those that don't want to play by the rules of open internet and transmission of activity should have built into that framework a way to exclude them if they will not participate. And then finally, and this goes with this, the framework for responsible behaviors in cyber and across other platforms and media. And underwater sea cables play in this, but so too are things that are like common standards for shipping and maritime monitoring in major ports across the IOR. What are the cyber standards there? What are the requirements? Whose 5G is it? Whose data collection is it? What are the norms and requirements for supporting those? And then the development of things that will allow undersea monitoring, tracking, relaying, collection and collation of data, analysis and transference, and doing that particularly in subsea areas by developing long duration underwater vehicles that are unmanned that can loiter and follow risky vessels, you know, those on the surface that are doing bad things commercially, or those that are on the surface or below the surface that may be trying to stay stealth for security reasons. Long duration below sea vehicles. Multispectral aspects of being able to track and know what's going on in the seabed and below the seabed. And there's several others that I can talk about in Q&A as I try to finish and wrap this up here. But I mention those in context of India American security partnerships, particularly technology partnerships, and then also standards and developments that an organization or a group like the Quad could play a role in trying to first establish and then encourage the commercial solutions that develop you the kinds of technologies that allow you to move from a peacetime environment where you're doing lots of commercial related and law enforcement things into an environment that is more challenging, more risky, and where you have to have the ability to be exclusive toward parties that are not playing by the rules and the norms or want to disrupt or shut down that open access to ideas, shipping, and commercial. So in summary, what I was trying to offer here is, I think there is movement in the right direction in 3 areas, but there's a long way to go. And this project, I'm certain, can help with that. First, movement in the direction of understanding the Indian Ocean region as being contiguous, layered and integral, and requiring like-minded partners to share that framework and develop organizations and institutions that build to that. Next, better develop interoperability, specifically in underwater domain awareness, so that we can have systems that are viable in commercial enterprise and law enforcement, but also equally viable in the case of confrontation and crisis. So we're not exposed or have those sinews either of trade, shipping, or the exchange of ideas and internet connectivity severed or cut off. That's the access issue. And finally, that we look for groups and clusters that marry interoperability and common standards for how to develop things that have this bridge potential. And there, one potential location is in fact the Quad. Partners, including India, the United States, Australia, and Japan, that have experience with this, that are actually doing a lot of this in the Pacific region, but that we can perhaps better apply and enable in the Indian Ocean. So those are my thoughts for you today. I thank you for the time to be able to express them. Recognize that I will be learning a lot from other experts on this panel. And thank you, Jeff and Dr. Das, and turn this back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. As always, you kind of hit the nail on the head on multiple occasions. So we already have questions coming in. We'll get to those in due time. But now I want to turn to Vice Admiral Carva. Sir, the floor is yours for your 15 minutes with our appreciation.
First of all, thank you, everybody, and particularly Dr. Arnab Das and Mr. Jeff Pine from NESA. And good morning to those from the United States, and good evening to all of us over here in India. And Dr. Thomas Lynch, I think you brought out some very, very important and very relevant points. And I'm sure that if these are followed up, we will be all the more better off as far as underwater domain awareness is concerned, particularly from the security perspective. So in my intervention today, I will not take more than 15 minutes, and I wish to cover and share my thoughts under the subjects. First of all, submarine capabilities and deployment of the PLNAV. Then what are the underwater security challenges for us, particularly in India, in the Indian Ocean region? A mention about the geography of this area and the choke points leading into the Indian Ocean and how they affect submarine deployments, and how do we address these challenges. And that's going to be quite some doing. It'll take quite some doing to address these challenges. And finally, suggestion or recommendation on what kind of security framework will be useful for all of us. So let me first touch upon the submarine capabilities, particularly of China. And let us take a scan of what kind of submarine fleet does the PLNAV have at the moment. Soon after World War II and after establishment of the communist regime, China in 1949, the Chinese embarked upon a very massive submarine building program. And in due course, they did have a large number of submarines, but they were mostly coastal submarines. And in numbers, I would say they touched nearly 100, but they couldn't go beyond the first island chain. But then leapfrogging to the present time, we find that in numbers, they have now approximately 60 submarines in total, of which 6 are SSBNs of the Jin class, which carry 12 JL2 SLBMs with a range of approximately 8,000 kilometers. And then you have the 6 SSNs, or the nuclear attack submarines of the Shang class, which basically have cruise missiles and torpedoes. And in addition, they have nearly 48 diesel-electric conventional submarines, of which nearly half, or I would say about 20 odd, are the Yuan class with the air-independent propulsion systems. The remaining are the older variety, the Romeo class, the Kilo class, the Ming class, and the Song class, which are not capable of going beyond a few hundred kilometers from their coast. So and the point is the PLA Navy has now embarked on a massive expansion, modernization drive for its Navy, and particularly its submarine fleet. And it may soon touch from 60, it may touch 80 submarines in due course, and most of them will be very modern and very capable submarines. The worry to all of us is particularly the SSBNs and the SSNs, which have capability which can allow them to be deployed in very far off regions of both the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. In the Indian Ocean regions, the other submarine population, or the submarine operating countries, are Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and of course India, besides Indonesia. Pakistan particularly has 5 of the remaining older Augusta 70 and 3 Augusta 90B. They have the French origin submarines. 3 of them are air-independent propulsion. So basically that gives it very long endurance. It's a conventional submarine. It does not have to come to surface for battery charging or come to periscope depth for battery charging very often. So that's the advantage of AIP. But more concerning is the fact that China is now building the same Yuan class AIP submarines, 8 of them, and orders have been placed by Pakistan on China. And because of some delays, the first submarine could not be delivered this year, but is likely to be delivered commencing next year. And so you'll find more modern AIP submarine for the first time being deployed in the Indian Ocean region, and that too of Chinese origin. China has also delivered or supplied 2 very old Ming-class submarines to Bangladesh and 1 Ming-class submarine to Myanmar. In addition, China has also invested in developing submarine bases both in Bangladesh and Myanmar. But what is more worrying now is, besides all these nuclear submarines and the AIP fitted submarines, China has now developed extra large uncrewed underwater vehicles, and these vehicles are basically autonomous underwater vehicles and can be launched from any platform or a specially capable platform, and has an endurance of many days, perhaps 15 to 20 days, and radius of operation which may touch up to 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers. And so that makes it very potent, particularly because it has a flank array sonar and can carry torpedoes and not missiles, of course. But the more worrying part is that these are autonomous vehicles, and they operate purely on artificial intelligence, and there is no the human out of the loop mechanism, the human out of the loop. Because of human out of the loop, these submarines, can pose a great danger to even unsuspecting vessels, and therefore these artificial intelligence-driven vehicles are something that can cause great worry to all mariners and seafarers if they are deployed in the Indian Ocean region. This is a completely new development, and many countries in the world have not perfected the technology as yet. But China, it appears, has already deployed them, but full details are still not available in the open domain. So what are the security challenges that we face in the Indian Ocean region as far as underwater security is concerned? Coming back to China, we see that China is the biggest extra-regional player as of now, other than, of course, the United States Navy in the Indian Ocean region. And they started deploying their units, their ships, to begin with, on the pretext of anti-piracy missions, which is quite specious because you don't require submarines for dealing with piracy. But that is what they did. And from 2008 onwards, there has been a continuous, regular, and sustained submarine deployments by the PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean region on the pretext of dealing with piracy in the Gulf of Aden. It is believed that, as I just mentioned, they are uncrewed underwater vehicles have also been deployed in the Indian Ocean region, but these reports are not yet confirmed. As we see from 2008 onwards, China has made concerted efforts to establish full-fledged permanent bases in the Indian Ocean region. And Djibouti is an example of the first military base for the PLA forces, which has been established outside the mainland China for the first time. In addition, Pakistan and Sri Lanka have been giving a warm welcome to all their ships and submarines, and both of them have made port calls in both these countries on regular basis. And these visits continue throughout the year. What is more worrying is that besides PLA Navy units, we also have research vessels operating in the Indian Ocean region with the sole purpose of mapping the underwater seabed for information and data which can be used for underwater warfare in future, including against as has been brought out, including against undersea cables. So as you see that a large number of submarine are operating in the Indian Ocean region, not only of the PLA Navy, but also those belonging to the Pakistan Navy, to Bangladesh Navy, to Myanmar Navy, to Malaysian Navy, Indonesian Navy, and all of this complicates the whole security environment even further. And the reason is quite obvious, because in all of this, to detect, classify, and identify a PLA Navy submarine is going to be extremely challenging, since the only source of doing that, the only way available as of now today of detecting, classifying, and identifying any underwater object is through use of underwater sound. And as all the experts sitting over here are fully aware that it is not as easy as is made out. The reason is quite obvious. Any detection, classification, identification of an underwater object requires enormous effort of time, resources, and assets. Ships, submarines, aircraft have to be deployed for persistent surveillance, monitoring, and tracking And this really is a huge challenge, and it cannot be done unilaterally by any one country, because the assets, the time, energy, effort required for doing that does not permit with the limited assets that most countries can deploy. Now, a word about the geography and the choke points of the region. We find that the access to the Indian Ocean region from the Pacific side is basically through four choke points. First is the Malacca Straits, then you have the Lombok Straits, the Sunda Straits, and the Ombai-Wattar Straits. And all these straits basically are in the Indian Ocean, in the Indonesian archipelago, but all cannot be used by submarines. Malacca cannot be used because submarines have to transit on surface, and which is obviously a total giveaway. Then when we look at Lombok Straits, they are deep enough for submarine to transit completely submerged, and so is the Ombai-Wattar Strait, which is deep enough for submarines to transit completely submerged. But out of all these, the Ombai-Wattar Straits are the deepest straits, and the reason why you require deep straits is particularly for nuclear submarines. At a minimum depth of 200 meters is recommended for safe transit, and these kind of depths are mostly seen in the Ombai-Wattar and to some extent on the Lombok Straits. So actually that poses a big challenge to PLA submarines that may wish to enter into Indian Ocean region, because out of four, the straits which are most suitable are just two, Lombok and Ombai-Wattar. The other point of geography that needs to be mentioned over here is that the PLA Navy has basically two submarine operating bases. One is on the Hainan Island, which is in the South China Sea, and the second base is basically in the northern part of the country near Qingdao. But the advantage of the Hainan Island base is that submarines operating out of this base are not constrained by the challenges of the inner island chain, whereas those operating from the Qingdao base have to transit either on surface or through the shallow waters of the straits between the inner island chain and the Pacific Ocean. And therefore, the Hainan base is the one which is more preferred for deploying the SSBNs and SSNs, rather for basing their SSNs and the SSBNs. And this then particularly makes it more difficult, more challenging for us in the Indian Ocean region, because Hainan is much closer. And therefore, transit time from the Hainan base into the Indian Ocean region is much less compared to from Qingdao into the Indian Ocean region. Between the SSBNs and SSNs, it is almost a given that SSN is likely to be it would be preferable to deploy SSNs into the Indian Ocean for the simple reason that they have a very long submerged endurance, whereas SSBNs with the JL2 SSBN with the 8,000 kilometer range need not actually be deployed in the Indian Ocean region for its deterrence task or deterrence patrol, which it can very well do when deployed in the South China Sea itself. So our greatest concern is from the SSNs that may be deployed, or to some extent even the normal AIP fitted Yuan class diesel electric boats. So what do we do to address the challenge of the PLA Navy submarines, and how do we secure ourselves from this underwater threat? in peacetime, in crisis, or in conflict. Firstly, we have to have knowledge about the location of these submarines, and this is easier said than done, and has already been pointed out by the previous speaker. We need to have a better interoperability, particularly in underwater domain awareness. As of now, I feel this is a weak area. Interoperability, to some extent, we have moved ahead in maritime domain awareness, in other aspects of warfare, but underwater domain awareness is something that is a lot of work still needs to be done to achieve that kind of interoperability and collaboration. The other thing, other point that I would like to bring out here is that tracking, monitoring underwater submarines, submarines operating in a dive condition is a huge challenge. The number of assets required, basically airborne assets are the best suited for this, but no Navy, let alone the Indian Navy, has enough assets to deal with this huge challenge. And therefore, one way to overcome this would be to concentrate on the choke points, and have a well-established monitoring system over there, as I have mentioned, particularly in the two straits, the Lombok and the Umbawatra straits. Setting up forward operating bases is another way of overcoming some of the challenges posed by distance and endurance, particularly for aircraft. Next point is collaboration and cooperation between like-minded navies. To some extent, this is already happening by way of the Malabar series of exercises. Quad is another forum in which quite a bit is discussed. In Quad, we now find that the Indo-Pacific MDA initiative has taken root, and they have accepted the need to have cooperation in maritime domain awareness. So I think the day is not far when similarly Indo-Pacific UDA initiative we should be seeing in the days to come, because if we do that, then the framework for sharing information for underwater domain awareness then will become formalized, and that is what really will make a huge difference in underwater domain awareness as far as the security is concerned. Information exchange is another area, information and intelligence exchange, that countries who have specific information, any kind of information on underwater deployments by PLA submarines, we need to have a formal mechanism, a framework for that. And the most important aspect of underwater domain monitoring is to have fixed seabed sensors and towed surveillance array ships, as also extra large UUVs. These are the three areas of technology that particularly we in India need to move towards. And in this regard, there is a lot of scope for technology sharing and technology transfer from United States to India for developing our fixed sea-based sensors, towed arrays, surveillance arrays, and extra large UUVs. Recently, the Indian government has given sanction and approval for constructing 2 SSNs, the nuclear attack submarines, and also signed the contract with Lockheed signed the contract for the Sea Guardian 9QB HALE UAVs, and both of these, when inducted, will make a huge difference to underwater domain awareness, since the Sea Guardian HALE UAV also has ASW capability. So in summary, in the end, I would simply make very quick 3 recommendations. Firstly, 3 recommendations for strengthening the security framework for underwater domain awareness in the Indian Ocean regions. And these three and the three pillars for strengthening the security arrangement rest on firstly technology, and I've already mentioned the three areas in which technology will be more than welcome from the United States. Then having adequate assets, combined assets of 2 or 3 countries definitely will be far more useful in tracking underwater submarines instead of just one country. And then collaboration, cooperation, and information exchange. Mechanism for this needs to be worked upon, and my recommendation is that we should have Information Fusion Center for UDA in the times to come, very much like the IFC IOR, the Information Fusion Center, Indian Ocean region for MDA, which has been so successful, and it is a multi-nation effort and already ongoing in and well-established center in Gurgaon near Delhi. So finally, in summary, I would say that underwater domain awareness to strengthen the security of Indian Ocean region is something which requires cooperation, collaboration, technology transfer, and information exchange. And I do hope that the participants in this seminar are able to give traction to some of the actionable recommendations. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I am trying to track all the comments that come in, so you can feel free to either wait for the Q&A or throw your questions in now, and I'll track them as we go. Vice Admiral, I appreciate your comments, especially given your expertise and your operational as well as strategic insight on what is happening in the Indian Ocean. Certainly we'll return to them. I have questions already. We're going to turn to our third speaker present with us here, and that's Ms. Samarayika. The floor is yours for your 15 minutes. And then after your comments, we will play the remarks from Ambassador Kumar or Dr. Kumar. So Ms. Samarayika, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. My thanks to Professor Payne and Dr. Das for the invitation to participate today. And also my thanks to Dr. Lynch as well for the shout out to my article. Thank you so much. And I thank you, Ms. Nishtha, for including the link. Also, I see in the chat. Okay, I was asked to speak about smaller states in the Indian Ocean and how they interact with the larger powers in the Indian Ocean, both regional powers as well as extra-regional powers. And I'll share my personal research on the Indian Ocean, and we'll make 3 points. The first will be some discussion on methodology. The second, I'll present a framework to help us with our understanding of the region. And the third, I'll essentially flesh out the framework by providing some examples. So first, for some assumptions on methodology, I'm talking from Washington, so I'm bringing with me an outside observer's view of the Indian Ocean, and I'll speak to my research on smaller states. I think it's important when where people are sitting, it's important to mention as a reference point. The second is a definitional point. What's a small state or a smaller state? And often this is a relational conversation, even in the context of considering objective metrics. For example, in a European context, a country with a population of millions of people, that may not, or that may seem quite large and not necessarily small, but in the Indian Ocean, there are countries with several millions of people. Just in Sri Lanka alone, 20 plus million people. That's pretty large, but in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka is considered a smaller state. Even a country as large as Bangladesh, with such a large population, really in the top 10 of the world's population, it still can be considered a smaller state when you view its neighbor next door, just given how large India is and all of its various capabilities. So there are many smaller states in the Indian Ocean, and we can really conceive of them not only just as small states in international affairs, which is a growing subfield of the discipline, but relationally as smaller states, because they navigate strategic competition between large powers or major powers like the US, India, or China. And then third, it's important to note the diversity of smaller states. Even though there are some common threads that link smaller states as a grouping, they're still quite a diverse set of actors, no matter where they reside, and in this case, the Indian Ocean. Second, I'll present a framework. Now that we have some methodological assumptions on the table, it is useful to think about smaller states as a key grouping that warrant greater analytic attention. And I see a framework with 3 components that can help enhance our understanding of smaller states. First, they have a set of shared needs. And this is often in the context of non-traditional security challenges, such as regarding maritime security and economic development needs. Second, they have shared concerns. This is often seen in traditional security terms and navigating major power rivalries. And then third, they often have surprising strengths despite their smaller size and what we would expect of smaller states with lower capabilities. And then third, let's flesh out this framework with considering some examples. So in terms of needs, there are common capacity needs, such as regarding countries' maritime security services, and in particular, as they respond to non-traditional security issues. These are essentially challenges that go beyond state-based conceptions of security, such as illegal fishing, narcotics trafficking, and natural disasters. To address these threats, smaller states will often depend on large powers from both the region as well as extra-regional powers for assistance, such as training and exercises for their navies and coast guards, as well as equipment and platforms to advance regional maritime security. For example, in 2020, Mauritius faced the environmental disaster of an oil spill after a tanker ran aground, and it benefited from assistance from an array of international actors. From France and India, they deployed naval platforms, and Japan provided assistance as well. More recently, Bangladesh, earlier this year, it saw 23 sailors on the Bangladesh-flagged ship Abdullah. It was taken hostage by Somali pirates for 33 days. Bangladesh had actually seen the hijacking of another merchant ship in 2010, and that crew was held hostage for 3 months. So that experience informed its more recent approach earlier this year, and the view that after the release of the crew and the ship, that this was actually a more successful handling of the incident. Moving on to shared concerns. Now, these are often in the realm of traditional security, where smaller states will express concerns about the misuse of their territory by large powers and will face challenges in their ability to craft independent foreign policies in the context of major power tensions, and they will experience pressure on themselves. For example, we saw Sri Lanka conduct frantic diplomacy in 2022 with both India and China after its decision to permit a visit by a Chinese ship to Hambantota port. And an idea that moved forward as a solution to the controversy is what has been called a standard operating procedure, or SOP, for future port calls by foreign research vessels and official military craft as a way to assuage concerns that were expressed by India and the US. And so this is an issue that we've already heard about this morning in our discussion, or this evening in our discussion, and this is an issue that will will persist into the new year, especially under a new administration in Sri Lanka, with questions about whether the moratorium on research visits, whether that will continue under this new administration. In neighboring Maldives, we saw a new administration that was determined to evict all foreign military presence and really challenged Maldives' National Defense Force itself internally to build greater capacity in the conduct of its own security operations. India faced protests in Seychelles a few years back when legislators and the public were concerned about reports of a potential military base on Assumption Island. And then within the past decade, the United States faced controversy and eventual rejection by both Maldives and Sri Lanka of proposed military status of forces agreements, or SOFAs. And then Britain's sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago has been contested by Mauritius through successful efforts in legal and diplomatic institutions. And the Chagos, of course, houses the UK and US joint base on Diego Garcia. And earlier this month, Mauritius and the UK finally agreed to a path forward to resolve their long-standing dispute. And then finally, there are strengths that may not receive attention that small states possess, and they can sometimes surprise observers. Small island developing states, or SIDS, are thought leaders on addressing global challenges, such as climate security, due to existential threats like rising sea levels. For example, Maldives has chaired the Alliance of Small Island States and was one of the first countries to ratify the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Also, the locations of smaller states can provide them with strategic and commercial advantages. For example, Sri Lanka has operated the busiest container port in South Asia, Colombo, and the Colombo port, it's still ranked among the top South Asian ports in Lloyd's list of 100 container ports, even after the drop in its ranking following its economic crisis in 2022. And Mauritius is a financial hub and top country in Africa for ease of doing business, according to the World Bank. And as a result of the Red Sea crisis, it's actually seen quite a spike in demand for fuel bunkering services after the rerouting that has taken place about shipping around Southern Africa, really due to its location. And just some numbers on this development, the International Bunker Industry Association found in the summer that demand for bunkers for most of last year was approximately 30,000 metric tons per month. And just in the first quarter of this year alone, it had jumped to 60,000 to 65,000 metric tons per month. So that's double the amount just in a single quarter. And then with regard to Seychelles, we actually saw earlier this year, the Seychelles Coast Guard, it has a special forces team. It rescued a fishing trawler and crew that had been captured by Somali pirates in January. And Seychelles, more broadly, has developed clear skills with robust counter-piracy experience from over a decade ago, and it's received significant support from over the years from various countries and institutions like India, the US, the EU, UNODC. So from a small state's perspective, it's often said that smaller states will punch above their weight. And the Seychelles operation earlier this year, it demonstrates that. It demonstrates this. So I'll note this is just one framework, but I hope we can encourage greater study and discussion of the smaller Indian Ocean states. Thank you.
Thank you. Also incredibly efficient with your time. So Ms. Samraika, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Nishta so we can play the video, and then we will have a few minutes for question and answer, hopefully. So I will turn over control.
Thanks, Jeff. Ayush, can you play the video now?
Yeah.
time. Ayush, am I audible? Can you play the video?
Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, it's coming up. It's popping up on the screen. Play it from the 0 second. Your screen isn't visible right now.
I'll share the video.
Hello, greetings to all of you. Let me start by complimenting Maritime Research Center and the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies for organizing this webinar, which provides a synergistic mechanism for consultations, discussions, and plans towards discussing the situation in the Indo-Pacific and coming up with synergistic plans for maritime economic growth and security. Friends, the geopolitical and geostrategic realities of Indo-Pacific, and more specifically the Indian Ocean region, cannot be ignored. The Indian Ocean region contains key global maritime choke points, including the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Strait of Malacca. These are critical for the global oil supply and trade routes, making the region strategically vital. Control or influence over these choke points provides leverage in global trade and energy security, creating intense geopolitical interest from global powers. The recent Israel-Gaza and the Middle East conflict has complicated the security, particularly in the choke points in the Middle East. The conflict has heightened tensions in the Middle East, particularly around the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and the Strait of Hormuz. The conflict has prompted many global and regional powers to increase their naval presence in the region, including the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea, thereby increasing the risk of unintended maritime clashes or disruptions to commercial shipping, which could spill over into the Indian Ocean region. The conflict has also emboldened militant groups and non-state actors to attack shipping, port, or offshore infrastructure in areas like the Arabian Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the coast of Somalia, where piracy and insurgent activities have increased in the recent past. The Indo-Pacific is a theater of growing competition. China's Belt and Road Initiative, including the String of Pearls strategy, has expanded its influence by developing ports and infrastructure in countries like Pakistan, where they have Gwadar, Sri Lanka, where they have Hambantota, in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Djibouti, just to name a few. The expansion at an unprecedented speed of conventional navy by China has changed the security balance in the Indo-Pacific. In the Indian Ocean region, we see that there is enhancement of Chinese maritime presence and passages, which may not always be innocent. Friends, India being centrally located in the Indian Ocean region has locational advantage to be the first responder in natural and man-made calamities, as well as to be a net security provider. And this is recognized by the countries in the region as well. For millennia, India has been a seafaring nation. Indian seafarers landed all over the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean shores over centuries, bringing with them prosperity and the eternal gospel of peace and coexistence. India's historical linkages inform India's current approach to the region. India's saga, security and growth for all in the region, India's Act East policy, her participation in Quad, and its emphasis on free, open, and rule-based Indo-Pacific are integral to its approach to Indo-Pacific. India and the US have a growing healthy partnership in the Indo-Pacific. Several agreements between India and US, including COMCASA, PECA, repair and maintenance of US naval ships at Indian shipyards, have resulted in greater coordination between the India and the US working together in the region. The Indo-Pacific, particularly the Indian Ocean region, is also a critical hub for global trade and energy supply. Over 80% of world's seaborne oil passes through the Indian Ocean, making it a critical energy lifeline for Asian economies. As the economic center of gravity of the world moves eastwards, the region's economic significance continues to grow. I must also say that apart from the great power competition which is being witnessed in the Indo-Pacific, the region is also facing a range of non-traditional security threats, including piracy, terrorism, illegal fishing, and natural disasters. Illegal, unregulated, and unlawful fishing greatly discriminates against those that act responsibly, honestly, and in accordance with rules. IUU fishing is threatening marine biodiversity in the region, food security for communities, and livelihoods of those involved in fishing. Further, environmental challenges like rising sea levels and maritime resource depletion also affect the strategic calculus of the littoral nations. Friends, in this context and in this background, the importance of underwater domain awareness has increased tremendously. Submarines, underwater drones, and other stealth maritime assets are increasingly becoming integral part of naval armory. And underwater domain awareness is vital for detecting, tracking, and neutralizing potential underwater threats from rival powers. UDA is also an integral part of surveillance and intelligence gathering. This is essential not only for early threat detection, but also for safeguarding India's exclusive economic zone, monitoring illegal underwater activities like smuggling, illegal fishing, and detecting foreign military assets in strategic waters. UDA is also essential to protect underwater infrastructure. The IOR is home to critical underwater infrastructure, including submarine communication cables that carry vast majority of global internet traffic along with energy pipelines. And this region has a heavy load of these submarine cables as well. While we talk of underwater domain awareness across the globe, I want to bring out that the tropical characteristics of the Indian Ocean region are quite different, and therefore the understanding of UDA in tropical waters is also quite different from that of the cold temperate waters of the Pacific and the Atlantic. Tropical waters are warmer and characterized by high levels of biodiversity. The warmth leads to unique challenges such as greater biofouling, increased biological activity, complex acoustic conditions which can complicate underwater monitoring and sonar systems. Coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds in tropical regions contribute to the acoustic clutter, making surveillance and communication more challenging. Cold waters, in contrast, offer clearer conditions for sonar propagation and underwater communication. The Indian Ocean region is home to some of the most biodiverse marine ecosystems, which play a critical role in the local economies. The biodiversity makes UDA complex as monitoring needs to balance security with ecosystem preservation. The presence of dense marine life can also create false positives for underwater detection technologies. The UDA is also influenced by heavy trade traffic and choke points in the region. The proximity of several key nations adds to the complexity of UDA in this region. The territorial disputes, particularly in the South China Sea and East China Sea, also influence UDA capabilities. The region holds tremendous blue economy potential from fisheries and tourism to offshore energy and seabed mining. UDA is crucial for sustainable management of these resources, preventing overexploitation and ensuring environmental sustainability. Given hotspots of high-value marine products like tuna fish, IU fishing needs good UDA to manage it sustainably. Tropical waters are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as rising sea temperatures, coral bleaching, and extreme weather events like cyclones. And UDA can help in this regard as well. Friends, in this background, I would now like to touch upon some of the maritime management initiatives which have been taken by India in recent past. India has made significant strides in managing its oceans and maritime domain through a series of visionary initiatives aligned with its broader Sagar vision. This includes the Sagarmala program, which aims to harness India's coastline and maritime resources for port-led development, improving port infrastructure, enhancing connectivity, and modernizing coastal communities. It also leverages India's extensive network of rivers, inland water transport, aims to promote water-based transportation as a cost-effective and environmentally friendly alternative to road and rail transport. The Prime Minister's Gati Shakti initiative integrates various infrastructure development programs under a single platform, streamlining coordination between different ministries and stakeholders to improve India's logistical efficiency, including port and waterway infrastructure. India's Deep Ocean Mission and the Blue Economy Framework focuses on ocean exploration, sustainable utilization of marine resources, and understanding climate change impacts on India's coastline. In this context, the Great Nicobar Island Project of India will further enhance to India's overall maritime capabilities in this region. Let me now talk about the UDA framework. The UDA framework, or the Underwater Domain Awareness Framework, developed by the Maritime Research Center in India, plays a pivotal role in enhancing underwater domain management, especially in the context of security, environmental sustainability, and economic growth in maritime regions. The UDA framework integrates sonar technologies, oceanographic data, and surveillance tools to improve underwater situational awareness. UDA emphasizes data sharing and collaboration between different stakeholders, including the Navy, Coast Guard, environmental bodies, and research institutions. This multi-stakeholder approach ensures that resources and information are pooled effectively for more comprehensive underwater management by encouraging technical innovation in underwater drones, acoustic sensors, and artificial intelligence-based data analytics. UDA pushes forward advancement in underwater research and operations, improving real-time decision-making and crisis management. UDA focuses on sustainable ocean resource management by using advanced underwater sensors and data analytics to monitor the health of marine systems. The data-driven approach of the UDA framework facilitates real-time monitoring of ecological changes, aiding in climate change mitigation and environmental conservation efforts. The UDA framework offers tools for sustainable exploitation of underwater resources while ensuring that commercial activities do not harm the environment. UDA is also aiding in early detection of underwater seismic activity, tsunamis, and other natural disasters. By continuously monitoring the ocean floor and tectonic movements, UDA can provide early warning systems, helping mitigate the impact of natural disasters on coastal populations and infrastructures. Friends, I conclude. The diverse challenges of the Indo-Pacific, from geopolitical tensions to environmental vulnerabilities, require a coordinated and innovative approach. By leveraging cutting-edge technologies, fostering international collaboration, and aligning with India's Sagar vision, UDA will not only safeguard our maritime interests, but also unlock the vast blue economy potential in a fair, equitable, and environmentally sustainable manner. As we move forward, we must continue to invest in this vital domain, embracing partnerships and encouraging the development of robust maritime infrastructure that can anticipate challenges and seize opportunities. With this forward-looking approach, India and the IOR can chart a course towards stewardship for generation to come in close collaboration with like-minded nations. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
So that was Dr. Ajay Kumar. He is the former Defense Secretary of the Government of India, and he's a distinguished professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Dr. Ajay Kumar is also a senior fellow non-resident at Carnegie India, and he's the founder and chairman of Mountech Growth Funds in India. That was it about Dr. Ajay Kumar, and I'd like to hand it over back to Jeff to continue with the Q&A session and wrap up the session so that we can move on to the next one. Over to you, Jeff.
Jeff, please unmute yourself.
That's my fault. Forgive me. I'm going to use the dictatorship of the chair to review 3 questions based upon everything I got, and let each speaker go through them quickly before turning to the next session. With the apologies to Dr. Doss and MRC, I don't want to let him go without asking him some things. The 3 questions are, and you can pick and choose each of the speakers from these 3. The issue of underwater domain awareness. There seems to be an emphasis on state-led initiatives and also non-state-led, coming from technological firms, coming from fishing communities and private sector. Is there tension there in your mindset, or are they complementary? Do they reinforce each other? That's the first. The second question is, how should we begin, based upon your each respective commentary, prioritize what topics to focus on when it comes to underwater domain awareness? What do we start with in your eyes? And then the third and final is, how do smaller states, less capable states, gain these underwater capabilities without angering or siding with any of the larger actors that are operating throughout the Indo-Pacific. And so, Dr. Lynch, you were first up. I know that you have pressing matters elsewhere, so I will turn it to you first, and then we'll go to the Vice Admiral, and then we'll end with Ms. Samarayka. Dr. Lynch, to you.
Hey, great. Thanks, Jeff. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I think I'm back on. Yes. Okay, so let me just tackle the first one because I know we are pressed for time in this forum, and I am excited to hear the other panelists on the other two questions. But this emphasis on state-led and then non-state-led development of underwater domain technologies and wider MDA technologies. I mean, I think a healthy and helpful way to think about this is that there is a complementary role for both, right? Specifically, areas where there is commercial law enforcement and other practical applications of underwater domain sensors or unmanned underwater vehicles for tracking and monitoring shipping, or those agents that are exploring for minerals in suspect areas, or tracking novel ways to transfer transnationally drugs or weapons or other illicit things. But I think there, the role of government is to help stimulate and maybe encourage collectivization of the natural commercial interests in having those things done. In many cases, there is a commercial demand, and so government's role doesn't need maybe to be so much funding those as it does to be encouraging the collectivization of technology providers to marry up with those who are demanding that. Now, that's not to say there may not be some place or scope for governments to stimulate and also even purchase as an incubator or a startup technologies that are just demonstrating a high bar to access in terms of money and technical know-how, etc. But I think in general, the space for the commercial demand is there, with the governments providing more of a encouragement signal for collectivized efforts across boundaries. But now when you get into things where states have a unique ability and need to apply demand, I think here you have to acknowledge that there needs to be a collective mechanism that goes beyond the standard commercial and legal enforcement protocols that are in place. And that is just because, in the language of economists, we will always see market failure. That is an absence of supply being provided to such things that are, like unique, like special sensors that would go astride the Straits of Malacca, that would be interoperable and reasonably secure to send signals back to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, or to exchange information someplace else. That's just one example. Other specialized UUVs that might have, more multispectral technology that would not be necessary for maritime security or fisheries or mineral tracking, but would be essential and critical for this interoperability we're talking about, to track potential hostile actors, to move from just black flagged fishing vessels or black flagged, black market commercial exchanges, and on to things like Chinese submarines or other activities. There is a role for state-to-state interaction. State-to-state interaction has to signal and then has to help fund, I should say, signal, establish standards, and then fund these specialized technologies. And here, admittedly, there is going to be then a nexus point that is going to be complicated, right? But you have to think in both those terms. You have to think in terms of what our government's going to need to require when you get to a more securitized program of underwater domain awareness. And how do you set the conditions on the commercial side with what's going on in non-strategic, more commercial and law enforcement functions, that you get commercial activity there, but don't assume that it's going to produce the outcomes you need on the more securitized side. So it's finding that bridge, getting governments together. And part of the reason I discussed the Quad as a potential framework to, one, establish standards for widely permeable and exchangeable environments, whether they be cyber or other commercial exchanges, but also with the potential to be exclusionary if and when necessary. That requires government standards, that requires, kind of best practices, and it requires some kind of outside funding. And here, the framework of the Quad, I argue in some of my writings, is uniquely postured to do this. It's already doing some of this in the Pacific. My argument is it needs to do more of this in the Indian Ocean region, and specifically the US, India, and Australia need to come together on standards that should be encouraged, not just between their governments, but in the programs of other smaller IOR states. And then I turn to Japan, because Japan has been creative in recent years in thinking through the financing, not only of MDA projects in the Pacific and the wider Indian Ocean region, but it also just under 2 years ago, for the first time, established a overseas security fund that can enable and allow countries to procure things that would have dual use, commercial and then potentially military, under the guise of funding. Now, a lot of what the Japanese initially seem to be doing in flagship countries like Bangladesh may have to go with common standards in ports and, framing transportation into the oceans, et cetera, et cetera. But thinking in more securitized terms through the Quad, the funding mechanisms that could be available, not just from Japan, but other members of the Quad, and how to distribute that in a manner that allows you to build better interoperability, commercial and law enforcement permeability, but the prospect for exclusivity when necessary. I think that's a way to think about state to state versus non-state actors involved in this space. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Admiral, would you like to dive into any of the three questions?
Actually, could you just repeat the question, because I could not get that.
My apologies. There was a question about what role do state and non-state actors play for underwater domain awareness? Are they complementary or are they in opposition? That's the first question. The second question is, what should we start with? You kind of mentioned this in your remarks. What is the number one priority for UDA as you see it? Or number three, and you can answer any or just one of these questions. How do smaller states gain underwater capabilities without risking siding with or angering one of the larger actors at sea?
Okay, yes. So let me, just share my thoughts on the first one, state and non-state actors, and what complementaries do they bring to strengthen UDA. Well, as Dr. Thomas Lynch has already pointed out, both have distinct roles. The state has its instrumentalities, and it exercises jurisdiction through those instruments, such as the Navy, the Coast Guard, other law enforcement agencies, the research agencies, and so on and so forth. And non-state actors are the academia, the private research, and other players who indirectly contribute or can contribute towards strengthening underwater domain awareness. And I think both have to partner with each other to bring to the table their own strengths. One cannot survive, one cannot do UDA on its own. It's a multidisciplinary activity. It involves so many disciplines of science, of technology. It involves law enforcement. It involves exploration. It involves many agencies. So to that extent, I think it is well understood that if we want to go ahead in UDA development, both state and non-state actors will have to participate. How that has to be done will have to be determined in each jurisdiction, in each country. No set formula or arrangement can be a standard arrangement or formula, cannot be imposed, or we cannot have a standard formula for all countries. But certainly both will have to cooperate with each other if we have to make any headway in UTA. The second or the third observation was how do smaller countries in the Indian Ocean region stand to benefit by either partnering or siding with one or the other big powers who are involved in this. You see, underwater domain awareness encompasses not only security, but as has been repeatedly pointed out by several of the speakers today, particularly by Dr. Arnab Das, that it involves so many disciplines. It's fisheries, climate change, HADR, disaster relief, apart from merchant shipping, traffic, and so on and so forth. And every country which is a maritime country in the Indian Ocean region depends on some of these blue economic activities for their own growth, sustenance, and prosperity. And therefore, participation or in the underwater domain awareness program or the framework will definitely strengthen their blue economy because climate change, for example, is an activity that is a science that has to be well understood by all players and participants. Because it's going to affect the smaller countries in the IOR more than the bigger countries. And therefore, underwater domain awareness, as far as climate change is concerned, is very, very important for everyone. Similarly, fisheries. Underwater domain awareness research will show us how the fisheries population is either depleting, where do they move, which are the best areas for harvesting fish in the oceans. So all of this is all part of underwater domain awareness. And therefore, according to me, smaller countries or smaller nations in the Indian Ocean region stand to benefit equally from the underwater domain awareness framework. And it's not limited only to underwater domain awareness security aspects. So that is what I would like to say with regard to these two questions. Thank you,
sir. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Ms. Samarayika, last but certainly not least, I'll turn to you. I'm going to guess which question you're going to dive into, but I might be wrong.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are all excellent questions. First, in terms of the question about underwater domain awareness and whether to what extent it's complementary, state-led efforts or commercial efforts, I mean, I think, right, obviously you've got to do a multi-prong approach. You've got to do everything possible. And I think one example we can look at that's quite exciting is the US Space Force, how they are approaching the commercial sector in terms of developing space capabilities and harnessing everything that the private sector can bring to this topic, I think holds a potential template for when we're thinking about the undersea domain and to look for what the US Space Force is doing. They've released their commercial space strategy. So they actually have public release documentation about how they're going about approaching the commercial sector in terms of the development of these capabilities. So to see a US military service really actively go out and try to harness the power of the private sector, it's really been an exciting and notable development, really, in the US Department of Defense to see that taking place. So I think as we're thinking about ways to strengthen our awareness of the undersea domain and underwater domain awareness, I think really looking to the US Space Force and their commercial space strategy and just their broader efforts in terms of allies and partners and really partner capabilities in partner private sectors. I think that's an important example to look at. And then yes, for smaller states, it's great to see Commander Roshan online with his great question. I think in terms of how smaller states will try to proceed in the undersea domain, yes, smaller states they face challenges. There's competing tensions between major powers and rivalries. And I think one example is to look at what Bangladesh has done. Essentially, of the smaller South Asian maritime countries, we've seen Bangladesh really pursue greater undersea capability in terms of purchasing the two Min-class boats from China. And there are unique drivers of that case, but I think the question is asking about smaller states and Commander Roshan's from Sri Lanka, but just thinking about how a smaller state goes about acquiring undersea capabilities. I think looking to what Bangladesh did, they were clearly pursued, or they're clearly motivated by the cost, the lower cost from the Chinese platform, also the training commitment that China provided with that program, but also some lessons learned. Bangladesh perhaps could have done better communications about what the drivers were of that particular program, which really has a longer history. So I think just looking to examples that are relevant, as Bangladesh is really that larger navy among the smaller South Asian maritime countries, I think that could provide a useful case for other smaller states as they're thinking about developing undersea capability.
Well, thank you all. It was a great panel. Sorry we went long, Dr. Das. That's on me. I will now round out this great first panel. I will turn it over to the second panel with my gratitude, and I will see you at the very end of today.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the session. Thanks to all the speakers who participated. Now, I think we'll quickly move on to the next session, where we will discuss on the topic capacity and capability building and strategic partnerships. The moderator of this session is Ambassador Anup Kumar Mudgal. A little bit brief about Ambassador Mudgal. He is the member of he's a former member of, he's a member of Indian Foreign Services, IFS, retired in May 2016 as the India's High Commissioner to Mauritius. He's currently a member on the Blue Economy Task Force at the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries, which is short for FICCI. In this session, we have quite a lot of experts with us who are going to be talking about the topic and discussing, taking the discussion forward. So I would now like to hand it over to Anup sir for his kind remarks.
Thank you, Nishtha. It has been a long session, yes. And if you really ask me, a lot has been said and most has. So I don't think I have very much to add from my side, but still, I will approach the issue from the other end of the story. Because we have been talking about the potential risks to the global safety, security, and stability. And most of the speakers have concentrated on what we generally call traditional sources of threats, which means the traditional security. And I also use the term called tangible. It's the tangible aspect of security, where we have much longer experience, knowledge. We can see those threats. We can feel those threats. We can literally touch those threats. But then there is other side of the story, which I call the intangible aspects of security, stability in the maritime and other spaces. And that end of the story is the environment in which we operate. because we are operating on these platforms, but these platforms basically constitute the environment. And environment is a major stakeholder in this discourse. So I thought, since other speakers have already spoken on behalf of the human society, so let me speak on behalf of environment. Yes. So I was looking at the latest report on economic development, global economic development. And the reasonable estimates are that in the next 24, 25 years, we aim to, and probably will do it, we will double the size of global economy, which means in the next 24, 25 years, we aim to, and I'm sure we will do it, we will add something about $105 trillion. Now, my question is, how shall we create additional economy assets with a of almost $105 trillion? For that, in fact, if I look back, we arrived at $105 trillion by doing a lot of things in agriculture, in manufacturing, in services, and all kinds of societal behavior. And when I look back, I see in creating these $105 trillion, the kind of damage we have done to the environment. We have damaged the land, water, air, biodiversity, you name it. Now, the issue is that if we are going to add another $105 trillion in the next 24 years, where do we get those inputs for creating that outcome? We will need energy, we'll need materials, we'll need technology, we'll need water, we'll need everything. And so far, a record of that everything getting from the environment has not been an example. Land is completely exhausted. And I hear everyone saying that, okay, let's go to the sea now. Can we get those additional resources from sea? Be it food, be it minerals, be it energy, be it transport, be it recreation, be it biotechnological resources. Now, we all know sea is 2/3 of this planet. And obviously, we can expect from sea those additional resources. But the issue is, when we go to the sea says, sorry, I am also badly damaged by the already human activity in the sea ocean space. They are suffering pollution, they are suffering acidification, they are suffering temperature rise, and they are suffering loss of biodiversity. Now, how would the sea provide those additional resources that we need for adding $105 trillion? I'm sure if we do the things the way we have done, they would not be able to. Now, what different pathway we have to take so that we are able to harness ocean for additional resources, but we do not cause further damage to the ocean environment? Because today, when we talk about existential threats, the top in that list is the climate change, the global warming. Every day I read a statement or a speech which includes a reference to global warming as the #1 systemic threat. And people are using the term existential threat. Now, we are all trying our best to make sure that that day doesn't arrive. Right? And if we have to go to the ocean, we have to see what contribution the ocean does in helping stabilize climate. Because in my from my viewpoint, the climate change, if it is an existential threat, it should be top of our consideration for security and stability. Because this this outcome of climate change would literally impact everything. I, as a blue economy expert, cannot see any other threat which could be as comprehensive as climate change or global warming. Now the issue is, why such conflicts arise? The conflicts arise when the stakeholders are not able to understand each other. The stakeholders are not able to generate sufficient trust. And the same thing is happening with the environment. We don't understand the environment fully and comprehensively. As a result, there is lack of trust between the human activity and the environmental behavior. Now, coming back to the ocean, because today's emphasis and focus is oceans. Now, understanding the oceans. Now, the question is, we should ask this question, do we really understand the ocean? How much of the ocean we really can claim to understand? We barely understand the surface of the ocean. Yes. And in terms of the climate change or global warming, most of the actions are happening underwater. If you barely know the surface of the sea, I can tell you we really don't know anything about undersea. The only thing we know about undersea is also from the viewpoint of the hardcore warfare. What about the core environmental issue? What about the physics of that water, chemistry of that water, and biology of that water? That part is not understood at all. And that is what is resulting in the problem of disturbance in the climate, because oceans are the single biggest climate stabilizer. Be it the absorption of carbon dioxide, which is the main villain in global warming, be it the production of oxygen, be it the hosting of the biodiversity, you name it, be it the weather control, water cycle, and all that stuff. And that is where, in fact, our understanding of the underwater domain is absolutely essential if we want to avoid reaching that stage of systemic risk of climate change. And therefore, I look at the UDA, underwater domain awareness, not from purely the traditional security aspect, but from the intangible security aspects, which in my view are more dangerous, more comprehensive, and that is why we call these are the existential threats. And most of those implications are also irreversible, because these are not man-made implications, because then you understand the dynamics, why we arrived at a crisis point. And reverse engineering of that is easier. But underwater environmental system, we simply do not fully understand. Therefore, those changes, in my view, would be irreversible. So therefore, the best course available to us is avoid arriving at that situation of crisis. Because going back will be very difficult. Because those are the pathways which we will not determine. Those pathways will be determined by the environment, which we do not understand. That is where, in fact, I place emphasis on UDA. Arnab's organization and many other organizations have started working on that. The idea is to understand the chemistry, physics, and biology and other aspects of underwater, and then developing what is called the markers for what is happening in underwater. For example, if a damage is taking place, can we have an easier marker to understand, yes, the damage is happening, and then are there those red lines which we should not cross? So that is where I look at UDA. And that is where under the organization and many more are working. I hope before it's too late, we would have much better understanding of the underwater domain awareness. And then using that mega data with the help of the latest tools of artificial intelligence and data analysis, we would be able to develop models which should be expandable, which should be scalable in helping us prevent crossing those thresholds of environmental damage underwater. So with these words, I'll stop because I know a lot has been already spoken about underwater. If there are any questions at the end, then of course we will deal with them. I have, I think, 3 speakers in this panel. And as the previous panel started sequentially as per the program, I will do the same. So maybe about 15 minutes each. First, I will invite Captain Charles Marx. You have used the expression "Chuck" for you, which is, I'm sure, a very affectionate expression to invite you. So, Chuck, the floor is yours, and you please take your 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate your opening remarks and then the transition from the panel that Jeff just led into this conversation. As we talk about capacity building tools, strategic partnerships that can help us address the problems that we talked about in the first session, and that you underscored with your perspective, Ambassador, on the environmental challenge that we're facing, particularly in the maritime domain and the undersea environment. We have a slogan in the Navy when I first came in many, many years ago, join the Navy, see the world. The small print, though, they don't tell you is that the world is 67% water.
Yes.
And so a lot of folks get misled by that, but I think that's a happy happenstance, if you will, for what I focus on. Currently at the Near East South Asia Center, my specialty area is focusing on professional military education and really educational best practices that can be shared with partners to build their capacity and capability. Most of our partners end up being the strategic level of education that usually a Ministry of Defense or an interagency entity in a country has that builds and trains and educates national security professionals who usually will be in positions, junior positions in staff, or at the very senior level in decision-making positions to develop policy for a nation. By focusing on bringing educational best practices to our partners, the goal is that capacity will improve, but also through a series of interactions, we develop close relationships and trust, which allows us then to come together and talk about things that we disagree on and things that we agree on. And by going at it through the educational channels, we're able to actually break down under Chatham House rule conduct, really the barriers to sharing ideas. One thing I've learned in my career as a strategic planner and an educator has been that when you bring a room of folks together with diverse ideas, you're going to come out with something much better at the end than if a group of folks who are like-minded think about a problem set. The best answers are those that are developed through sharing. So what I want to talk about for just a couple of minutes are some of the things that we have done in the realm of professional military education, which I think will help, I think with most of our partners, developing national security professionals who can then focus on the maritime domain and undersea domain areas. In all of our programs, we integrate topically the maritime domain because many of our partners, particularly in the Middle East, aren't thinking about the maritime domain, but they're all impacted by it. When you think about supply chains, when you think about them getting their goods to market, if you think about their food and energy security and global warming and sea level rise, and of course, natural disasters, many of which come from the sea, every country that we deal with has a stake in this realm. So some of the things that we do under our professional military education programs are to focus really on the faculty. The students are a byproduct of what we do. And I'm going to imitate happenstance-wise. Dr. Das, earlier you talked about your frameworks. Our framework here at the Near East South Asia Center is very similar. We focus on engagement, outreach, and education as our three primary vehicles or pathways to interact with our partners. So if we can get in and work with a partner, the things that we are keenly interested in doing are things like developing a faculty, reviewing curriculum inside of a potential university, develop methodologies to deliver the curriculum that are based on adult learning models and outcome-based education best practices. We also have the ability, because we're co-located with the National Defense University here in Washington, and I know that a couple of my peers that are on the call have helped out the Near East South Asia Center as we interact with partners, because we bring subject matter expertise to the table to help fill out faculty gaps that a partner institution might have. We also focus specifically on the development of strategic leaders, teaching leadership and strategy development, strategic decision-making, strategic crisis management, organizational change management, because as you're instituting strategies, you're going to be changing things as you go. And then, of course, topically, thanks to Jeff Payne, nearly every one of our programs includes a component of maritime awareness as folks are exploring that area. So trying to get our partners to turn away from their sometimes contested land borders or their water security issues with a neighbor and focus on the supply chain leaving and the supply chain coming into their countries. And why, for instance, a conflict in Russia and Ukraine might be important because of things like bread security in the region. So we also bring along with us a capability to do strategic decision-making exercises and tabletop exercises. And this is actually a place where we've had great success in bringing partners who disagree together to talk about the very thing that they disagree on in a way that's constructive. South Asia Center has 13 strategic partnerships with institutions in our region, and we're growing that number more. We've been deepening that relationship over time, and we've been working on things related to this domain in nearly every one of our sessions. I'll give you an example of just some of the things. I call them the elephants in the room. These are the things that sometimes folks don't want to talk about that we are able to unpack with our partners. Global warming and climate change, natural disasters and how to better respond and prepare for those. In the maritime domain, we've already talked about trade and industry, natural resources and fisheries, but also the communications, both below on the seabed for when it comes to the internet and mass global communications, but also communications on the surface of the water through shipping and shipping lanes. And I think we've been very astutely unpacking the communication pathways in the undersea domain through submarines and unmanned vehicles. We also spent a lot of time talking about energy, food, and water security, and then also countering non-state actors when it comes to things like piracy, violent extremist organizations, and countering synthetic narcotics. Those are other things that are in this domain that I think we need to be mindful of. And of course, cybersecurity and emerging technologies. One thing I did want to point out, we spent a lot of time talking about conflict, obviously the conflict in Gaza and Israel and then in Lebanon, as well as the conflict in Ukraine and Russia has an impact in the maritime domain that's pretty significant. I know when we talk to, for instance, our partners in Egypt, and they're looking at the loss of commercial revenue through the canal, when you look at the loss of tourist revenue inside of Jordan, our folks aren't going to the Red Sea to do much diving right now based on the conflicts. There's all these other kind of residual impacts when you think about the Indian Ocean and the rim, as Jeff talked about it. Everybody has the potential to gain something and also to lose something if we're not working together. And I think I'll kind of end it with this. in many cases, by working with educational institutions in this nexus of government and civilian leadership, you can do it in both a bilateral and a multilateral way. Oftentimes, the bilateral environment is important because maybe a partner doesn't want to sit down at the table with a neighboring with which when they're having a dispute, or a multilateral non-threatening educational opportunity allows partners that might necessarily disagree to come together and maybe talk about things that they disagree with. And then I think a final thought that's come out in nearly every one of our events that we've conducted over the last couple of years. Some of the smaller nations definitely have the ability to find a niche capability in the world of professional military education and can then be a force multiplier in delivering to partners in that same context. I'll give you just some examples without referring to nations by name. But if a nation has become very good at planning and preparing for disaster response, they can take that capability, that ability to plan, take that to another partner and work with them. And this is a case where we've been encouraging our bilateral partners to find that one key capability that they have. Another example is countering synthetic narcotics. There's a couple of countries that are becoming very good at understanding this problem set. And then through a professional military education program, can share that expertise with a partner. So they can bring something to the table that then a partner could then share back with them something from their area of expertise. So with that, I'll stop it and cede my time back to the ambassador and for the other speakers, and I look forward to hearing from them. And thank you for including me today.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you so much. In fact, this is what we were contemplating in terms of how to deal with capacity building and developing trust. You see, in fact, in my view, capacity building or empowering your partners is an important source of building trust. Because sometimes we feel that we can give a solution to somebody without realizing that somebody will never trust that solution unless they understand how you arrive at that solution. So many times we make this mistake that, okay, we'll give you an end product, but then it doesn't create trust. It may solve a requirement, a need, but it will not create that trust. So that was, in fact, Chuck, at the heart of our initiative called Sagar. Sagar was security and growth for all in the region. Which means that if a problem is global, the solution also has to be global. These problems cannot be solved by one, no matter how powerful or competent, because there are local conditions which others may not understand. So therefore, one fit all is not available to us. So if one fit all is not available to us, please involve all those who have a different fitting size and try to understand and come at a common point or common ground for cooperation. So I thank you very much. In fact, you elaborated on what your institution is doing in promoting that cooperation and capacity building. And now I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Jeffrey Gresh. Do we have Jeffrey there? So Jeffrey, please unmute yourself. Yeah, I can see you now. So please, you take your 15 minutes and please add to the value of what has been discussed so far.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. So thank you again to NESA and Professor Payne and the Maritime Research Center, Dr. Das, for the opportunity, the invitation to speak today. I really applaud the efforts of the MRC and its underwater domain awareness. Today, in my brief remarks, I'm going to focus to a large extent on Japan, which has come up here and there, but not focused on perhaps as much, because I believe Japan's government is very much at the forefront in a lot of the maritime domain and underwater domain initiatives that we are discussing today. I'm going to organize my remarks around three main areas to think about the further collaboration and capacity building that could take place. First, for deep sea exploration. Second, for increased regional and international cooperation and capacity building. And the third is the growing importance of securing submarine fiber optic cables. First, to deep sea exploration. As mentioned by several of the speakers, seafloor mapping is still largely uncharted terrain for most nations. The world ocean covers approximately 70% of the Earth's surface, but only 15% is mapped. In 2017, the chairman of the Nippon Foundation revealed the foundation's Seabed 2030 initiative at the UN Ocean Conference. The Nippon Foundation teamed up with the General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans to map the seafloors of the world ocean by 2030. As Seabed 2030 has ramped up, more than 200 partners across the private and public sectors and 50 nations have now joined the effort to contribute data to the global mapping project. Certainly, a greater understanding of the world's seabeds cuts both ways. On the one hand, it will enable greater support for oceanographic research that might be tied to geological fault line movements that cause earthquakes or tsunamis. It also has the benefit of contributing to enhanced climate research on new and unknown marine ecosystems or the general health of the ocean as temperatures rise. On the other hand, it provides valuable insights into potential future exploration and exploitation of rare earth elements deposited deep in the Earth's crust. If extracted in a sustainable fashion, these minerals could prove valuable as more nations seek greater energy, self-sufficiency, and carbon neutral resources, in addition to being critical to future economic security and a general green transformation. The second point is increased regional international cooperation and capacity building. Beginning in the mid-2000s, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, supported an increase to grant aid programs that provided Coast Guard vessels to like-minded partners and allies. Official Security Assistance, or OSA, has only been formally adopted when it was referenced in Japan's 2022 National Security Strategy, but the government's embrace of security assistance has been evolving over the past 2 decades. JICA first approved the donation of some of the first Coast Guard patrol vessels to Indonesia dating back to 2006. It also helped stand up Indonesia's first Coast Guard in 2005. Following the 2013 National Security, the government began to ramp up more of its security assistance programs systematically as it supported additional program in maritime safety and security amidst a rising China. In 2015, JICA and the Japan Coast Guard donated assets to the Coast Guards of Djibouti and Vietnam. The 6 donated ships to Vietnam helped to build up both its fisheries surveillance force and Coast Guard, and was part of a larger 500 million yen aid package dedicated to supporting maritime security. These aid packages were followed by vessel donations to the Philippines in 2016, Malaysia in 2017, Sri Lanka in 2018, and Kenya in 2019. In the Philippines, Japan has donated 12 patrol crafts, 13 fast boats, and a coastal radar surveillance system. By comparison, Kenya received 17 patrol vessels. In Sri Lanka, JICA financed 2 fast patrol craft and 2 offshore patrol boats as part of a recent $180 million package. Japan also regularly donates smaller and less expensive patrol craft, including a recent donation of 24 coastal rescue vessels to the Bangladesh Coast Guard in 2018. In addition to vessel donations, the Japan Coast Guard has been actively involved with joint exercises, trainings, strategic dialogues, diplomatic outreach, and other capacity building programs with numerous neighboring or regional nations since the late 1990s and early 2000s. In the Bay of Bengal, Japan's government has been actively involved with India's Coast Guard since 2000 as part of its sustained presence across the Indian Ocean. The 2 nations host the Sahyag Kaijin exercises that now includes the Maldives and Sri Lanka in an observer status. And beginning in 2013, Japan and Sri Lanka also established a dialogue on maritime security and oceanic issues, including increased cooperation on maritime law enforcement, search and rescue missions, humanitarian and disaster relief, and environmental protection. Japan's government has similarly signed multiple memorandums of cooperation with the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Maldives, and Vietnam that include high-level meetings and joint maritime exercises. Japan has also signed a statement of intent in 2018 with Australia's Border Force, which does not have a Coast Guard or formal maritime law enforcement agency. Certainly, the bilateral relationship with Australia still has much room for growth and improvement. Across ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific, the Japan Coast Guard also has begun to deploy mobile cooperation teams to support local coast guards with a variety of capacity building assistance. The MCT programs began in 2017 when it deployed its first team to work with the Philippines Coast Guard and now has some 15 MCTs across the wider Indo-Pacific. The Japan Coast Guard also recently announced that it will build the largest Coast Guard vessel in the world at 30,000 gross tonnage. It'll even surpass that of China's Coast Guard vessel CCG 5901 in documentation that it continues to invest and push its Coast Guard deeper into the Indian Ocean. To the last point on the growing importance of securing submarine fiber optic cables. One additional component that is pushing Japan to becoming so vital to maritime security across the Indo-Pacific is the government's ability to produce, protect, and repair the submarine cables that line the ocean's floors. The estimated 540 undersea fiber optic cables that line the world ocean are responsible for transmitting more than 95% of voice and data traffic. This also amounts to around $10 trillion in financial transactions each day. Anything that disrupts the information and financial flows across these oceanic networks can have a significant spillover effect. As tensions rise in the Indo-Pacific and law of the sea issues become more salient, we've witnessed more submarine cable cleavages globally, along with new bureaucratic maneuvers by China to slow the laying of submarine cables. This should come as a significant wake-up call for Japan and others across the Indo-Pacific, and certainly has huge implications for the future. The rise of submarine cable cuts in recent years falls into a larger global pattern of growing security challenges tied to the subsea information highways from Europe to Asia. Japan in particular has an opportunity to become more of a regional and global leader in submarine cable laying, repair, and security. To begin, Japanese firms are frequently ranked as some of the world's largest submarine cable manufacturers. The top cable producer in the US is the US firm Subcom, while some of the other top manufacturers are Japanese, including the Nippon Electric Company, the subsidiary of the Nippon Electric Company, the Ocean Cable and Communication, and Fujitsu. The top 5 US, European, and Japanese together account for more than 90% of global cable production, while the Chinese-based Hengtong Optic Electric, an optical firm that acquired Huawei's submarine cable division in 2020, holds just 10% of the remaining market share. At present, Japan also has 4 to 6 repair and cable laying ships, compared with China that currently owns at least 2. The telecommunications firms Nippon Telegraph and Telephone and KI own or charter 2 or 3 each, while the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces reportedly owns 1 ship, the JS Maroto. Combined, they make Japan one of the most consequential cable laying and repair countries in the world. Following the momentum generated by former Prime Minister Kishida's announcement to double Japan's defense budget to 2% of Japan's GDP over the next several years, Prime Minister Ishiba's administration has an opportunity to advocate for further investments in the country's submarine cable laying and repair industry, in addition to the expansion of JCG, or Japan Coast Guard, and JMSDF platforms and assets that can protect against growing cyber domain threats and defend both Japanese and regional submarine cyber cable networks. The importance of undersea maritime domain awareness, including enhanced intelligence and cyber capabilities, is seemingly not lost in Japan's defense establishment. The activities of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces cable-laying ship, the Moroto, are rarely publicized, and JMSDF members are reportedly tight-lipped about the ship operations. Yet, every year, the JS Moroto conducts cable-laying exercises with the U.S. Navy at its base in Guam, a promising sign of awareness between the two allies of the necessity to defend these networks. The JMSDF, in conjunction with the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, or JOMSTEC, and the U.S. Navy, also continues to invest heavily in research and development of future generation UUVs. Furthermore, the JMSDF recently announced that it was standing up a newly organized and named Fleet Information Warfare Command to better coordinate and manage information warfare and a spectrum of naval domain awareness activities. Aside from a hard security angle, a ripe opportunity also exists for Japan's government to tie further investments into its free and open Indo-Pacific framework that aims to promote increased multi-layered connectivity and economic prosperity across the region. Japan has already demonstrated its leadership and ability to support several island nations, either under duress following a major natural disaster, or for nations that seek to upgrade their submarine cables and broader access to faster internet connections and the 5G network. Most recently in Tonga, Japan helped to support a pair of 56 miles of a subsea internet cable that had ruptured following a 7.6 magnitude earthquake. Japan also worked with Australia and the United States to finance and lay the Palau Spur cable in the Indian Ocean, the first trilateral infrastructure project of its kind. Beyond Oceania, other countries have similarly expressed a preference to work with Japan over other countries. Chile, for example, opted to reject a Chinese proposal in favor of one offered by Japan's government for the first submarine fiber optic cable between South America and the Indo-Pacific. Japan could indeed emerge as a vital alternative to the construction of new cross-regional cable networks. It's all to say, as shown here, that Japan's government really has the ability to remain as a world leader that can manufacture, repair, protect these highly valuable submarine cables across the global commons and the Indo-Pacific more broadly. So with this, I'll end my remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I very much look forward to the questions and follow-on discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. You have really explained, very comprehensively what Japan is doing in terms of technology development and also in terms of technology sharing for capacity building. I deal with blue economy primarily, and it is estimated that the economic assets of the oceans would be around $23 to $24 billion. In my view, it's an underestimation. It is certainly much more than that. And then, in fact, I paid attention to your comment on the seabed mapping of resources. In fact, that is where, in fact, I, as a person who works very closely with the conservation part, I would caution that we should go to the seabed for harnessing only with a corresponding understanding of the underwater domain awareness. In fact, there was a recent report which mentioned about something called dark oxygen. We say that the oxygen is produced by the modules we want to expect at the seabed. It's called dark oxygen. Now, the issue is that that very oxygen, which is produced by these nodules, is used by a large number of species under the deep sea. Now, we know that the oceans are home to almost over 80% of biodiversity on the planet. And this is when a large number of the species we don't even identify. We have not even identified. Now, these reactions or these interactions under sea are extremely complex and complex. As they simultaneously involve all the factors in the physical space and chemical space, in the biological space, and also in the social space. Now, my issue is that, again, with my background in biology and environmental sciences, that space is so sensitive that any change crossing the red line, in my view, will become very difficult to reverse. Because we do not see that, we do not know that, we do not understand that. And as a result, we would not understand the process that has led us to cross that red line. And as a result, for us to reverse that path will be very difficult. So that is where, in fact, my concern that, we must be underwater domain awareness before getting into these new areas of blue economy harnessing. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your wonderful presentation. And now it leaves me to invite the ultimate or the final or the last speaker, Shri Ashwin Shroff. He would give us a perspective from the social, from the entrepreneurship, from the corporate sector. Because at the end of the day, while we can talk about a lot of things, but these are finally implemented on the ground by the industry. So if the industry is not on board for those ideas, obviously it will be very difficult then to achieve those goals. So let's listen to Mr. Shroff. Sir, I'm sure we are on the same page when it comes to economic development sustainability.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Anupji. Thank you, Dr. Das, for inviting all of us. And it has been a great pleasure listening to all the veterans, both international and from India. Very, very great learning exercise. And thank you very much. Being the last speaker, one has to be more careful about time, which I will be. As you rightly mentioned, that while a lot of things go on, but the private sector also has its own role to play. We as a family, we as a company have been around for about 80 years plus, and we always believed in being part of the society and doing something for the society, for the environment, etc. So as part of that, we have been attending to a couple of things which are important and are becoming more critical. One is the climate change as an issue, which is affecting many things. And in the context of ocean, I think oceans are one of the most affected areas. And when you say ocean, the undersea ocean, the marine life, the fishery, the shipping industry, there are a lot of things happening. So that's one area that we are attending to. And what can be done about climate change and how can you reverse it, again, using ocean. So that's one area. The second one is that as a world which is growing exponentially in the IT, digitalization, etc., I think the role of the minerals and the metals, and especially now the word critical has been added to the word minerals and metals. So this has also become very important. I'll just deal with these two subjects as quickly as I can. And then, so on the climate change front, we've recognized for last almost 15, 20 years that this is something which is like a slow poison. It is affecting the whole earth, many vulnerable sectors, agriculture, rural areas, ocean, fisheries, etc., etc. But we, human race, seems to be quite unaware that while we continue to work and live with more and more power and energy and all that, that to fossil power. So with the result that we keep on sending a lot of carbon dioxide into the air and create more and more climate change and also acidify the oceans, which is affecting the ocean life. So we are doing two things about that. One is we identified that in order to pull out the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and from the ocean, what you need is a vegetation which can grow very quickly and need CO2. So we have been working for the last about 7-8 years on seaweeds, which grow in the sea. You don't need land, you don't need water, you don't need fertilizer, nothing. And the crop cycle is so short, only 45 days. So you can easily take 6, 7, 8, 9 crops in a year, and it pulls out the CO2. So that's one. In turn, it gives a great biomass, which can be very useful and is a source of many things: food, cattle feed, fertilizer, um, uh, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, even bioplastics can be made out of seaweed. So that's one area of focus that we have been giving. And we have been working with Dr. Das and MRC on promoting this through youngsters, and how can we invite more youngsters to join in that. So we are also working closely with the coastal communities, fishermen included, but also other coastal communities. Of late, we have also started interacting with the shipping industry, which also is one of the very big contributors to the climate change, by using one of the dirtiest fuels, the what they call bunker oil, which is a very dirty fuel, generates a lot of not only carbon dioxide, but also black smoke and all that. They want to shift to safer fuels, which are renewable. So biomethanol, and we as a chemical company are looking at how can we get into that, and also use the port facilities, the shipping facilities for doing that. So this is one area of climate change, using seaweeds for reversing, and also producing biomass, producing technologies which are useful for the climate change management. So that's one area that we are working on. The second area is the critical minerals. And I was very happy to hear Dr. Geoffrey Gresh talking a lot about Japan. I would say the Japanese have been very great at doing this. The Taiwanese have been very good. But all these are countries which are highly vulnerable to Chinese threats. So I think we need alternate sources. The whole world needs more sources from where it can be done. India has taken a good lead in looking at the semiconductors, the renewable energy, the solar power, the electric vehicles, etc. But none of these can work unless you have the critical minerals available. India fortunately has some, but the oceans are again a great source. The nodules that you talked about, I think they are a great source. India's very long coastline of nearly 8,000 kilometers. And there are active institutions in India which are looking at the nodules available on the ocean bed, how to find out, identify, and how do you extract them. And after they are brought to the surface, then how do you extract the metals and the minerals out of that, which is where we are collaborating with them. So this is what we are doing. And only 2 days back, I was in the city of Bhubaneswar in the state of Orissa in India, which is full of lot of minerals. There are excellent institutions, both of government and private, and we are collaborating with them to see how we can help in doing this. And I think China dominates in many fields. This is one of them, but they also dictate their own terms. And I think the world needs alternate sources of supply. I hope India will soon become one of them. Indian government is very supportive, both of the climate change, seaweeds, as also the critical mineral extraction. So we are participating in both of them, and we look forward to working with all of you and helping the world cope with some of these problems and opportunities. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Das, for inviting me. Thank you, Anupji.
Thank you, Sharaf Saab. In fact, this is what we're looking for, just to see how the business community looks at the environmental issues, and how could, because we need all the whole of society approach for solving this very, very complicated problem. But my, submission always is that, for example, we all say, let's transition away from fossil fuels. A wonderful idea. But before we go for an alternative, we need to very seriously examine the carbon footprint of the alternative. In fact, so far, the data is not available on the carbon footprint of the alternatives. So therefore, I always, try to emphasize that instead of going for new resources, can we place greater importance on circularity, which means, can we recycle those rare minerals? Can we work on energy efficiency more carefully? Can we reduce the mineral dependence of manufacturing? And finally, is anybody thinking of the consumption? At least can we get rid of wasteful consumption? I think first we need to work on those aspects more seriously. Because if we look at, for example, the transport sector. Now, the transport sector contributes about 10% of the total emissions. Now, if to transition the transport sector from fuel to the battery, if we have to go and blast the sea floor, then I'm really worried. Because the sea floor absorbs more than 30% of the carbon dioxide that we produce. So to save 12%, we are risking 33%. If we do it without understanding the underwater domain awareness. So therefore, for me, in fact, it is absolutely a prerequisite that we comprehensively understand the underwater domain before we dig into the sea for additional or new resources.
Very true. Very
so
true.
with these words, I will thank everyone. And Nishta, if there are any questions, you will have to read them because I don't have access to those questions, and then we will try to answer those questions. Thanks a lot, everyone. It was very enriching discussion. And I'm very happy you forced me to the basics again. And I think the solution lies in the basics of society's functioning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mudge, for moderating the session. I do see a couple of questions that are targeted towards like mostly, Dr. Gresh. The questions are for Dr. Gresh. There's one that Mr. Jeffrey Pine has asked. He asked that how integrated is Japan's effort for maritime security tied to unilateral or multilateral engagements, or does it defer to bilateral efforts alone? So, Dr. Jeffrey, if you have comments to share.
Sure, it's a good question. I think that in general, it's true that most of what we see comes out of bilateral relationships. But I think one of the arguments I've made in some other pieces or some things I'm working on now is that Japan is indeed trying to push beyond the U.S.-Japan alliance. It's critical. It's not going anywhere. But I think there's some concern domestically. This need, of course, as China has expanded deep into the Indian Ocean, that Japan sees its interest increasingly insecure or more vulnerable. And so, the bilateral is front and center for a lot of this maritime security. But I also think you're seeing there's actually one initiative that took place in the last couple of years between just Japan, India, and Australia. And that was really, really interesting for me to see. And certainly, of course, we've talked, and I know you talk, and I know you know all about this, Jeff, is the Quad has become, we'll see how it plays out with Prime Minister Ishiba. But certainly as the former defense minister, he values the defense, at least, on its face for the moment.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. There's another question that Chuck had for you, and the question is that are there other actors, quote unquote, nations or otherwise in the Indo-Pacific following such a focused or coordinated effort to have influence in the undersea domain, like Japan?
It's a great question, and certainly, as we know, as everybody's well aware, China is the biggest one. But I also think, it's true, as mentioned, and obviously our colleagues from India can speak more eloquently to this than me, but I think Sagarmala and Sagar important for India. And, certainly this, I was unaware actually, to be honest, about the underwater domain awareness initiative, and that's the right thinking. And to be honest, I think the United States, we need to do much more We do a lot in the private sector, but if you look at, the topic of conversation related to rare earth elements came up, look at the United States equivalent, our agency, which very few people know about. It's the Bureau for Ocean and Energy Management. And if you look at their budget and you look at their staff, it's insufficient and it's inadequate. And so, on our side, we need to be investing a lot more in not just, certainly military capabilities, but really private sector, but also private sector adjacent, where the government can kind of support some more of these underwater initiatives. But Japan really, I think, and that's what I'm trying to do. I, put a plug in for a book that'll hopefully come out next year on Japan to tell more of its story related to what it's doing in the Indian Ocean and the broader Indo-Pacific, because I think many people don't appreciate exactly how far it's come and what it continues to do. Over.
Right. Thank you so much. So this brings us to the end of this session as well. Now I'd like to call Mr. Jeffrey Pine to kind of like wrap up everything, and if he has any comments to share or any questions to ask from anybody, he may take over.
Okay, thank you. Great second session, especially given that we moved away from the kind of obsession that all of us usually in this space live in, which is talking about all the formal security stuff. Especially here in Washington, like you could bring up television shows and somehow that's going to end up being a conversation about US-China competition. So it was very, very enlightening to get beyond that, especially because the maritime space has so many features. I just have a few summary commentary. One comment to echo what the good ambassador that, was speaking to. One thing that the United States needs to do, and I think I'm in good company given that every essentially commander of Indo-PACOM has said the same thing, that the US needs to sign UNCLOS officially, so we can also therefore become part of the International Seabed Authority, which we are currently prohibited from joining because we're not signatories of UNCLOS. But that's a separate issue, another conversation for another time. But my takeaways from this conversation this evening for some of our participants, this morning for us here in DC, is that there's much more to do in this space. There are so many variables, it can almost become overwhelming. But the good, I want to also see from the good news. I think this is true of Delhi. I think it's true of Tokyo. I think it's true of Canberra. I think it's true of London. I think it's true of Washington. I can say for certain it's true of Washington that we tend to fixate on what we're doing wrong, not what we're doing right. And I think there are a lot of things that we're doing right. And I think these things came up today. Have we solved these problems? No. Have we figured out how everything's going to come together? No. Have we figured out private-public partnerships? Have we figured out how to address climate change while enhancing our traditional security? No. The point is there are more actors and there's more stakeholders in the conversation than ever before. It makes it somewhat chaotic, which honestly a lot of government services don't necessarily like because it means that it's harder to control, but it just means that there's greater possibility of a breakthrough idea, something that can be a game changer. And so I'm encouraged by that, and I hope everyone's leaving with that. That's the main thing I'm taking away beyond the good recommendations for everyone. NESA is happy to continue engaging not only with our friends at the MRC, but anyone else in the room. Chuck and I are at NESA, so you can reach out to either of us. We're happy to engage however we can and continue these conversations, especially him and I, given our focus on kind of engagements with the maritime space kind of together as a kind of a marriage of logic there. I wish nothing but good wishes to everyone there. I hope you send goodwill towards the United States so we have a very boring election result, no matter what happens, no matter who wins. I just want it to be very boring that day. I doubt it happens, but I just hope it's very boring. But my thanks most especially to everyone at the MRC. Nishta, you wrangled all of this, so my sincere thanks to you. Dr. Das, thank you for taking the reins on wanting to kind of organize this with NESA's help. We hope that NESA served our side of the equation well. I look forward to engaging with all of you again. And just comprehensively a final farewell from here in Washington, D.C. on this October day. So thank you.
For the closing remarks, for the vote of thanks, we have Mr. Praful Talera, who is MRC's advisor on blue economy. So could you come up and share the vote of thanks with all of us? Praful Talera, sir.
Express my heartfelt thanks to everyone for making this very interesting session webinar possible. First of all, our hosts, NESA and NESA Center for Strategic Studies, especially Mr. Jeffrey Payne, for his excellent introduction of NESA to all the delegates. Secondly, to all the distinguished speakers, Thomas Lynch, Vice Admiral Karna, Ms. Nilanthi, Kamal Naik, Dr. Ajay Kumar, Captain Charles Marks, Dr. Jeffrey Gresh, and Ashwin Bhai. And a special thank you to Ambassador Anup Mukhal for participating in the second session. And thank you, Nishta, for coordinating and working behind the scenes to make this possible. Today, we discussed one elephant. I thought it was very important. Not just one elephant, but so many elephants in the room. And it was very interesting that, see, all these three global commons, the space, the underwater, the water, have so many why very one of the speakers and successful one and see. And as MRC and
We have a connectivity issue, I think.
we have a lot of we'll get
Prafulji, we have a connectivity issue on your end, I think. Not able to hear you at all. I think we will end the session. It's been a long session. Prafulji, we have a connectivity issue. We can't hear you at all. Sorry, Prafulji, there's a significant distortion when you are speaking. I think I would like to thank all the speakers. Jeff, thank you so much for making it happen. Captain Charles, Nilanthi, Jeffrey, everybody from the US side, and of course, Mudgal sir, Ashwin sir, and everybody from the Indian side. Thank you so much for making it happen, and we are really grateful to you. And Jeff, we will continue the conversation. and plan more things as we go forward. And thank you to my team, Nishtha, Sridhar, and Ayush, and Shreya, and everybody for making it all happen. And you can see I don't do anything. Everything is done by the team. Thank you so much, everybody.